Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. Going to start with a moment of silence to honor a former chair of this commission. Actually, Deb Hayes was the one who recruited me to serve on the Planning Commission and gave from 2012 to 2020, served on the Planning Commission and chaired for 5 or 6 years of her term. And the celebration of her life was today, and somebody said that because of her work on the Planning Commission, her legacy, one of her legacies is that Wilmington has changed for the benefit of those for generations to come. And so we just really owe her a debt of gratitude for all her public service and specifically for this, on this commission. So let's just have a moment of silence. Thank you. And now will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Attorney, do we have a quorum this evening?
We do.
Madam Attorney? We have 2 attorneys here tonight. All matters requiring commission action shall be presented to the Planning Commission by the planning staff and the applicant. In situations where planning staff is the applicant, there will be only one presentation. City staff will make the first presentation. The applicant will make the second presentation. Both presentations are limited to 5 minutes. And who do we have keeping time tonight? Thank you, Ms. Painter. To maintain an orderly meeting, all presentations shall proceed without interruption unless the commission desires to intervene with questions or comments. The chair will open the public hearing for those physically present wishing to speak about an item. Those in favor of an item shall be heard first, followed by those opposed to an item. A 10-minute time will be allowed for public comment in favor of an item. A 10-minute time will be allowed for public comment in opposition. A staff member, Ms. Painter, will track the 10-minute time periods and will notify the speaker at the 5-minute mark, the 1-minute mark, and verbally call time when it expires. The chair, in their discretion, may extend these time periods. All groups, organizations, neighborhoods, or similar associations desiring to comment are asked to appoint one spokesperson to present their concerns or point of view to the commission on each agenda item. The public has been encouraged to submit their comments in writing via a web-based form located on the City of Wilmington's website. All comments received prior to 3 p.m. today were forwarded unedited to the Planning Commission. All comments we received will be delivered to City Council when the item advances. All comments received will be made available to the public if requested. All votes will be voice votes after proper motions are made and consistency statements read into the record. The chair will state the outcome of the vote and the action. Rezoning requests that receive an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission may be appealed by the applicant to the Wilmington City Council. Appeals should be in the form of a letter submitted to the city clerk within 10 days of this hearing. Any items being appealed will tentatively be heard at the second City Council meeting in May, currently set for May 16th, 2023. Commissioners, in your packet were the minutes from the February 1st meeting. Do we have any discussion or revisions? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Pollack has moved to approve the minutes from February 1st. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Goins. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right. Agenda item number 1 is a conditional district rezoning of properties containing 1.87 acres located at 5029 Carolina Beach Road, New Hanover County. O&I CZD, which is Conditional Office and Institutional, to MD17 CD, High Density Multiple Dwelling Residential Conditional District for a 56-unit multiple dwelling senior housing development. And Mr. Chambers is here to give the staff report.
I have nothing on my screen. There we go.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. This site is located on the eastern side of Carolina Beach Road, and as you stated, contains about 1.87 acres. It's currently occupied by a single dwelling home. We do have a map showing the project in the context of the surrounding area. As you see, it's just north of Monkey Junction. Here are some photos of the subject property. And here's some photos of adjacent properties on Carolina Beach Road. The applicant has requested that the site be annexed into the city's jurisdiction. A public hearing for that will be scheduled for the City Council's May 2nd meeting. The site is adjacent to an existing satellite annexation, which is currently zoned MD17 CD. This is the proposed site plan. The applicant has requested an initial zoning to MD17 CD for a 56-unit senior housing development. Access will be provided by Sandlapper Way, a private drive which has access to Carolina Beach Road. And there would be a multi-use path provided along the frontage, which would ultimately connect to a new trail that is being constructed by NCDOT, which ultimately give them access to the commercial services located to the south at Monkey Junction. The applicant has provided some elevations of the proposed building. The Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan, it promotes affordable and senior housing dispersed strategically throughout our city. The proposal creates additional high density along a high capacity transit route and near commercial services and transit stops. Staff believes this proposed amendment is consistent with our comprehensive plan, is reasonable in the public interest, and we are recommending conditional approval with those conditions that are included in your case summary. I would be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is prepared to make a presentation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, Brian, quick question. Obviously, this is what you're asking us to approve tonight or to rule on tonight is if this were to be annexed, what we're being asked to do is recommend the proper zoning to the city council to consider the annexation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So if somehow we came out of this discussion tonight that said the zoning we recommend ends up being the same zoning that's there today, what changes with the applicant's package?
If you recommend a different zoning,
Yeah.
we would carry that recommendation forward to council because they would have to act on a zoning to assign zoning to the property.
Okay. Okay. And then the only other question I had was in your, I'll find it here. Hang on. In your recommended conditions, one conditions, it says, the number 4, it says, the use and development of the subject property shall be in substantial compliance.
Vice Chair Pollack, can you please talk into your microphone?
I have this problem every time, Amy, I'm sorry. On your condition number 4, and you use the word shall be in substantial compliance, what's the difference between that and total compliance?
The code does allow for some tweaks and modifications based on full site design, so that's put in there to say that there could be some tweaks made to the site plan, but it has to be substantially compliant with whatever plan that is presented and ultimately adopted by council.
I mean, the applicant would have to come up with a pretty hard case to make some tweak it, and that would go back to the technical review committee?
If it falls outside of the scope of what's allowed in the code, it would come back through this process.
Okay, that's all I have for right now. Thanks, Brian.
Mr. Chambers, this project uses tax credits, is that right?
I
As
believe
part of
so,
the-
and I think the applicant would be able to answer the details on that.
Certainly. How often do we get a tax credit project come through here, whether it's through the Planning Commission or?
It's not very often. I think I'm trying to think back, the last one you saw, I know Middle Sound Loop Road was a tax credit project, Starway, but that was a general rezoning, so you didn't really see the plan for that one. So it's There's maybe a couple a year.
Great. And would you say that the tax credit projects are a big part of our efforts to increase access to affordable and workforce housing, like as a general?
Absolutely.
rule of
Every
thumb?
tool in the toolbox, and this is an important tool.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? Commissioner Adams?
Brian, you may not be a county zoning expert, but, like you are with the city, but is there something about the existing zoning that by right, this project couldn't be built there now without annexation into the city?
It's currently zoned in an O&I conditional district in the county for office buildings. They would have to rezone it. I'm not sure what the reasoning was not to pursue that under county. I think the applicant would probably be able to answer that one.
Commissioner Lennon?
Do you mind going back to the map that showed the surrounding zoning? Yep. So is it fair to say most of that's commercially zoned?
I think to the south for sure. To the north, it looks like it's kind of hit or miss. But generally on a major road corridor, you're going to see more commercial zoning. I think those land uses will probably correspond with the commercial zonings.
Okay. And then I'd like, Madam Chair, I do have some questions about the strong support, mild support arrows on the staff report, but I think it'd be better to ask those after the applicant presents.
Okay.
Thanks.
Noted. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
And the applicant is here. Ms. Norris?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Norris. I am one of the owners and developers of the property, also one of the owners of the proposed property management company that would manage the property. My mom, Joan Norris, is here with me. She's my business partner. Taught me everything I know, by the way. I'm going to go on the record as saying that. And we exclusively develop and manage affordable housing. That's all we do. That's all my mom has done since 1978. And so we're proud of the portfolio we've built. To give you an idea about our portfolio, we have currently 26 properties that are operating now that range in size from 10 units to 84 units, or 80 units, excuse me. They are located in Raleigh. They're located in some very rural communities in east of I-95. They're located in Fayetteville and Wilson. We have one currently under construction off of Gordon Road, which is also a tax credit community. That will be 84 units. That is a county-zoned property that's under construction. And I have to give a shout out to Deb Hayes for that property, because without her efforts and her support, that one wouldn't be underway. So I have to go on record as saying that too. So in total, we have just over 1,100 units in our portfolio that we own and manage. I touch and see often and handle the financial records of that regularly. So we're vested, and we are also New Hanover County residents. Our businesses are based in New Hanover County, although our properties might be scattered throughout North Carolina. I just wanted to tell you that because I know I don't recognize some of these faces, and you probably have no idea who I am or where I came from. So I want to give you a sense of comfort that we are vested in this community to improve it and to improve the lives of all the residents here. We currently have 3 affordable housing properties that are exclusively senior, that's similar in size to this. One is in Raleigh, 64 units in a single building. Columbus County and Whiteville, 44 units in a single building. Excuse me. And another 60 units in Wilson in a single building. That one is a 2-story property. Raleigh is a 3-story. So this property is somewhat unique to me too. I'm going to be quite honest. I'm going to take the bull by the horns. I've never built a 4-story building. I'm going to tell you that right now. I know that's probably the first thing that you're going to hear from opposition, and I know that's probably the first thing on your mind. This property itself is already technically in a good place for development. The existing community developed to the north of it, Woodridge Point, did a lot of work to put a lot of infrastructure already in place, from existing utilities to stormwater facilities to the access point that we will use on Sandlapper Way, including the deceleration lane that is on Carolina Beach Road. So there's not a lot of work to be done to get this property ready, but it is a prime location for what we are proposing. As you're aware, Monkey Junction is less than 1 mile away. There is a Carolina Beach Road trail that is in the works or in the planning stages, hopefully under construction about the time that we would be under construction. So there's a lot of good synergy about this property that makes it an attractive location for senior 55-plus community. So with that, I'll get started, and Brian, to advance the PowerPoint. Oh, just use the arrows. Okay, sorry, don't do this every day. So this is Sterling Reserve. This is the building elevation that is included in your package. What I wanted to specifically point out about this building elevation are some of the materials that maybe were not identified in the package that you received. Maybe they were, but we intend to use a fiber cement product, some brick product, so that we have a durable, long-lasting material that's relatively low maintenance and will stay attractive for the community, for us, and for the life of this property. So we're not just throwing vinyl out there, we're not just, putting something out there because this is affordable. I know that's the connotation that many people have, is that they're just gonna slap something up. That's not our intention at all. Because this is affordable, because the budgets are tight, we want it to be a long-lasting property with relatively low maintenance costs over the time period. Okay. So essentially, this is the same site plan that is in your packet. I did change the orientation a little bit.
Sorry, is that 5 minutes already?
Oh, okay.
Do you,
Well, all right.
do you need an extension?
I would like an extension, if I may.
How about,
That's the fastest 5 minutes I've
I
ever.
know. How about 3 minutes? Is
3
that-
minutes is fine. So
help
I'll
you?
go through this site plan in detail. So it is a single building, 56 units, 4 stories. The proposed height of the building from finished floor elevation to peak of the roof is 52 feet. The arborist that we retained for this site plan development indicated to me that the existing mature pine trees on the property itself right now are roughly 70 feet or plus in height. The existing mature hardwoods are 40-plus feet in height on the property. And with the tree survey, you can see what those mixes of vegetation are. We are meeting, slightly exceeding our open space requirements. Our consultant, Davie Resource Group, formerly Land Management, they evaluated the property. There are no wetlands or floodplains on the property, so therefore no impacts. And then CFPUA confirmed the utilities that are immediately available to the property, including the water line, which is fortunately on our side of the road within a few feet of the right-of-way line. What I wanted to point out to you is there is an existing privacy fence on the property. That's the red line that you see. And it is located roughly on a 15-foot setback line into the subject site. And there are some existing trees behind that fence in one location, and then it jogs to the property line. What also exists that was not surveyed, but I have some photographs for you to share later, is Willoughby Park. When it was developed and annexed into the city, they had to install a type B buffer on their property line because they were multifamily up against single family. So there's existing vegetation on the Willoughby Park side as well that is, 15 years old at least, if not older. It's just not properly illustrated in a survey that you see here. So getting to the unit mix, and I'm happy to dig down into any questions that you might have about affordability, but getting into the unit mix, 32 one-bedrooms, 24 two-bedrooms for a total of 56, and that includes 6 specifically designated handicap units. We have 2 existing properties in the area of this property that are family, but that still allows for 55-plus residents, and my check today indicated that our current residents today that are 55-plus at Bennett Village on Piner Road, there's 39% of those residents are 55-plus. At Lockwood Village on South College Road around the corner, 51%. And between those two properties, there's a total of 132 units, and we currently have about 92 applicants on the waiting list, which is low for us, for sure. So we need to build that up. This tells you a little bit about our communities in the area. We do have one relatively new, similarly sized property that is 72 units. Okay, thank you. I'm
That was
happy to
3
answer any
minutes.
other questions you have.
Sure. You can certainly finish your sentence if you can.
And
Need to
this,
wrap
this
up the slide.
particular slide gives you a list of the amenities that are interior to the building and on the site as well. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, don't go anywhere. We'll see if we have any questions for you. Commissioner Lennon,
I'm sorry you just
come
sat
on back
down.
up to the podium, Ms. Norris. That's right.
What do you mean when you say this is an affordable project?
So many people think of it, with seniors, you don't really think of workforce with seniors, right? But it is affordable in that it is a mixed income-based property. We set the rents to target certain specific income levels. Our targeting, let me go back if I can. You'll see in the kind of top right corner of this, our targeting on our income mix is going to be 30% of area median income. And then-
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. So
Yes, sir.
what does that mean?
What that means is, let me jump to that page. That means that a person who's earning $17,910 per year, a single individual, that is the most that they can make in order to fit into that income category. So anybody that's making under $18,000 a year is probably in the 30% area median income category for New Hanover County as of this year, as of the current numbers for this year. That they do change, those numbers do. So if you were two people living in a two-bedroom unit, or a one-bedroom unit even, those two people combined could not make more than $20,460 per year to afford a 30% rent. And then it grows a little bit to the 50, it grows a little bit to the 60, but we're not reaching into anything above 60% area median income.
So one of your answers in the public comments that you got intrigued me. So you do criminal background checks and credit checks. Can you talk to us about how you select your tenants?
Sure, no, I'm glad you asked, because this is not, just because you have this income doesn't mean come on in. We're just like any other apartment community, apartment manager, in that we do run criminal background checks, not just when you move in, but annually, because we have to recertify your income every year to make sure you still fit within the income criteria to live here. We also do the credit checks, and we also reach out to other previous landlords. So we get to know our residents very, very well, because we have to recertify their income every year. We get their bank statements, we get their employment verifications. We know everything to the penny about where they are income-wise. And again, because we rerun the criminal background checks, this allows us to know whether anything has taken place, during their tenancy that we're not aware of.
So who do you report that information to annually?
We have to report it to the state agency that awards the tax credits and ensure we're in compliance with the state agency, with the IRS, essentially. But the state agency is the one that administers the program. We have to report it to our equity investor and any lenders that we have that come into the sources. So it is information we have to be on top of for compliance purposes.
I have a lot more questions, but I'll just ask one more. What's the height? This is zoned O&I in the county right now.
It is.
Do you know what the height restriction is for O&I in the county?
For O&I in the county, I am not aware. I think for city purposes, it could be as high as 90 feet, maybe?
96, I do know that one.
96 feet, okay. Oh, that's right, it's in the report. So yeah, if it were in the city, the height could be as high as 96 feet.
With the current zoning?
With, no, sir. I might need Brian's help with O&I zoning in the city and building height.
If it was O&I in the city, it would be 96 by right.
Okay. I'll reserve some parking questions for later.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, stay at the podium, please. Any,
Okay.
Commissioner Adams?
This is a good segue, John, to my question. So what was the motivating decision-making for redevelop or rezoning in the county versus annexation in the city?
So without getting too much in the weeds in terms of tax credits, but again, happy to get as far as you want me to go. With tax credits, what that means is if we're successful at winning the property, at winning tax credits for the property, and as Ms. Lyle mentioned, that might happen maybe once a year. You might see a property come around once a year, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that I'm going to win the tax credits, and I do have competition. But what that means in terms of your question is this property is right now currently proposed to be a $13.7 million all-in development property, okay? With the tax credits, I take those tax credits to an equity syndicator, and they purchase the tax credits on behalf of an investor. And that purchase can translate to $10,300,000 and some change. So basically 75% of the money to build the deal comes from the tax credits. And then you're left with, okay, how do I fill the rest of that? In our proposal, we would pursue a HUD 223F loan, which is a 35-year loan, 35-year term, and roughly right now in the market, just over 6% interest. So if you compare that to a traditional commercial loan, right now, you're going to get 10-year term, or maybe 15, and you're going to get 7 or 8% interest, and you're going to have a slew of other things associated with that. So we are able to leverage a better loan term or a better type of loan for this. So then that still leaves another gap of about a little over $1 million, and that's why we wanted to sit down and meet with, or that's why we wanted to consider annexation into the city. City has home dollars. City has home dollars that they need to utilize for the purposes of housing, affordable housing, whether it's new construction or otherwise. So that's our goal, is to annex, to be able to capture those dollars in the time frame that we need for our application process for tax credits. Yes, the county has taken some major steps, and they've done some great things over the last couple years with funding, but their cycle, their schedule, doesn't meet our schedule in terms of the tax credit application process. Long way to answer your question, but there's a lot to it.
Commissioner Pollack?
When I look through your neighborhood meeting notes,
Yes, sir.
and I see 3, it says the following issues were discussed. It says, 1 was housing for low-income seniors will negatively impact the Willoughby Park property values. That's kind of number 1. Number 2, proposed 4-story building will be as tall as the existing trees. Number 3, proposed parking is not sufficient for 56 units, and the layout cannot provide adequate access for emergency fire access. Can you kind of, for the commission, address, you heard those concerns. How did you address those?
Can I pick the low-hanging fruit with parking first?
Go first.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So the site plan itself has been vetted by many members of staff and through the TRC. So in terms of emergency access, we've had to prove that the radiuses are sufficient enough to meet the needs of emergency access vehicles. So I'm confident that we are doing what we need to do there. In terms of parking, the city actually lets me reduce parking even further than what I am proposing, and I am proposing 61 parking spaces for 56 units. That's always debatable, really. I can tell you that our property in Wilson, which is a 60-unit senior community, has too many spaces. What those spaces are, I should have done a count before I stood up here tonight, and I didn't, but I can get back to you with that information just so you have something to compare it to. But we feel comfortable that 61 spaces is good for day-to-day life. Is it going to be tight during a Christmas holiday or some other holiday where there's lots of family that wants to come visit? Perhaps, and we'll deal with that as it comes. So I feel comfortable that 61 is a good number, and it's a number that's been also vetted by the Housing Finance Agency. The other one was with regard to building height, and I am prepared to speak to that a little more in depth in that the proposed building's 52 feet high. The arborist confirmed for me that the vegetation height that varies between hardwoods and pines is similar to the building height. And then I have some other photos that I took that would show the perspective from Willoughby Park, that would show the perspective of me standing on the property itself. Yes, the leaves are blooming. Should I have taken the photos back in January? Perhaps. And yes, you're going to still see, you know, through some of the vegetation, the building, but it's not going to be the predominant thing that you see with all the vegetation that exists out there. And then
Property values.
the property
declining.
values. So this property is considered a commercial property. So appraisals that are done for properties like this are using a commercial-based criteria. Properties that are appraised in Willoughby Park are residential appraisals. So there's really no cross-reference to value from one property to the other. We maintain our properties. We are there. We have site managers that are on duty. We are just down the street. I mean, we are not going to let this property fall in disrepair or let residents stay there that are not following the rules. So we can't, because we would be out of compliance with our tax credits, and we would be in trouble with our investors and our lenders.
Another quote, excuse me. Sorry. What happens if you don't get the tax credits?
It's a sad, sad day. It's a sad day, but if my seller is willing to fight with me and stay with me, and he's here, but if we don't get the tax credits this year, then we will try again. And we've done that before. Lockwood Village on South College Road, it took 3 tries, 3 separate years. The challenge with these properties is that the seller is under contract for, in some cases, 15 to 18 months before the property's ever closed on. So I can't just walk out there and entice someone to go under contract with me, because most sellers, they'll want to be closed within about 12 months. These deals are very unique deals, and they don't move fast. They are marathons. They are not sprints.
That actually brings up a kind of a follow-on question is, you know, we're sitting here, what's today, the 5th? April 5. What is the deadline for you to apply for these tax credits?
So I'm already in the cycle. So
You're already in?
Yes, sir. So January is the first submission every year, and that's where the finance agency grades the site against other sites in the East region. I can tell you there were 23 applications submitted in the East region this year, and of those 23, every site received a perfect score, because the site scores just came out about a week ago. Every site received a perfect score. So I'm in the heat of it. The next criteria that you go for in terms of, or that they evaluate is the market study. We received our market study a couple weeks ago. It basically says what we are proposing as we are proposing it will barely scratch the surface for the need in the county and barely in this area of the county. I mean, it's only 56 units when you really think about it. So we're in the cycle. The next submission is May the 12th, and that is where we submit additional financial documentation, such as the development cost, the sources. We've got conditional commitments for those at that time. And then we show them what our operating budget is expected to be based on all the other properties that we've developed that are similar. And then what the 20-year operating pro forma will look like. So that's where they really kind of dig down into the financial viability of the property, as well as some of the other scoring criteria that sets us apart maybe from the other East Region properties.
I was going to say, so your competition isn't just potentially another property in Wilmington,
Correct.
Wilson or Raleigh or?
That's correct. So East Region is anything from I-95 eastward, Virginia to South Carolina. There were 2 applications submitted in New Hanover County this year. We're one of those. The other property chose to remain in the county. And there's only, unless you're in a metro area, which was Wake County, Durham, Guilford, Buncombe, Mecklenburg, there's a couple others. When you're outside of those counties, there's only one award per county per year. So it doesn't go a long way to meeting the needs, you know, to really set, and it takes so long to get these properties out of the ground. So yes, you're right, we are in competition with everything in the east. Right now, by my estimation, properties, and by the tie break criteria, if we all scored perfect, or since we all scored perfectly on the site, I have to assume that they're gonna score the same as me on their properties as well. So we're gonna go into it and have to look at the tiebreakers. The tiebreaker, the first tiebreaker, is based on the counties that have the most need but have received the fewest awards. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. By my estimation, Halifax County, which is one of the applicants, Beaufort County, another of the applicants, and Columbus County would be ahead of us already. New Hanover County is already in fourth place. So if New Hanover County is going to be in fourth place, and there may be 5 to 6 awards in the East in total this year, I got to do everything I can to be competitive, and affordability is the second tie break. So, more than you wanted to know about it, but
No, actually,
it's fascinating.
It is, but I just kind of wanted the context of, I wanted to make sure for the commission and for, you know, everybody watching and participating, is that this is not a discussion about, I got to have this because I've got to make an application tomorrow. I want to understand contextually where you were in the process.
Correct.
Final question. The picture that you've showed us in the package, that is what you're proposing. That's not just something I've used someplace else.
That is what we're proposing, and it is also what we're committing to the finance agency as well. You know, you've got to go with economies of scale, you've got to go with efficiency, because even if I receive the tax credit award in August, I have 2 years to place that property in service. And what that has to happen in 2 years, I've got to get through the site design and permitting process, which easily could take 9 months, right, or 6 months. I've also got to get through the due diligence on the funding side, which in some cases could involve a HUD environmental review. That in and of itself might overlap the permitting side, but still could take an additional 3 or 4 months. So 9 months post-award, and I'm still, you know, not digging dirt. And then digging dirt could take 15 to 18 months. So I'm bumping up against my tax credit delivery. I've got to deliver those tax credits in 2 years to my equity investor.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay,
Great questions.
I have two questions. How long are the units going to be affordable? How long is the?
So typically, it used to be you're in a 15-year compliance period, and then you had to commit to another 15 years. That post-compliance period is extending to like 20. So you're really committing to an affordability period, 15 plus 20, 35 plus years of affordability. So your next question probably is, okay, well, what do you do? At some point, you've got to rehab the property. I mean, how can you keep these rents that low for 40 years? So yes, probably year 20, after we're through our compliance period, we would try to find a funding source to help rehab the property and generate affordability, maybe apply for tax credits again, maybe do a bond deal and combine that with some of our other properties.
And Housing Finance came out with a product for repairs to the SHARP program, so hopefully that will be in full swing by year 20 of this project if it
And fully funded, right,
happens.
by
That's
the
right.
legislature.
We can hope. Let's see, the other question I had was more of a design question because of the scale of the property, which came up in the community meetings, of course. Was there any consideration to do 2 buildings just to break it up a little bit?
We actually more like talked about doing an L-shaped building so that more of the property would front, or more, excuse me, more of the building would front Carolina Beach Road as opposed to the long side. When you start breaking the building up in that way, or you separate them, first of all, if I have two buildings and I'm even two-story, I've got to put in an elevator. So the cost of a second elevator for another, not to mention whether I've got the space to do a second building or not, became cost prohibitive at that point. When you consider an L-shaped building, you also run into construction challenges with that drive the construction cost up. So as much as I would love to twist and turn or shift the building over to Sandlapper Way, but that's my access point, this truly was the best location, honestly, for the building placement itself, and to try to stay off of that property line as much as we could.
Okay. And the elevation number 2, is that the one that faces
Carolina Beach Road.
Carolina Beach Road, has a little more fenestration on that? Is that right?
Say your question one more time, I apologize.
So, building 100 side elevation, elevation number 2, I think that's the one that would face
That's
College
correct.
Road.
That would face Carolina Beach Road, yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
So
excuse
it's-
me, Carolina Beach Road.
It's our attempt at making that side of the building look as much as like a front side as possible without getting too costly.
There's a balance, I see. Yeah, I'd like to see a little more front-looking on that side that faces Carolina Beach Road, for exactly the reasons you mentioned, but.
One of the other challenges that we have had with buildings like this, where you have so many individuals living inside one building, is I try to limit the exterior access points to keep it to what you need and not do too much of that. So I'm trying to balance that component as well. You don't want just anybody walking in the door. I mean, there will
Sure.
be key codes and keypads and things of that nature, but we do try to, it's where people sleep inside those buildings, and they can be the most vulnerable. So we try to keep the security in mind when we're designing those exit points.
Thank you for,
I'm not saying I won't relook at anything. I mean, if there are suggestions, if the staff would like for me to do that, I can certainly work with the architect.
okay. Commissioners, anything else for the applicant right now? Commissioner Lennon? Commissioner Adams?
Sorry, a couple more follow-up questions. One is a design-related question. When it became apparent that there were a lot of questions about scale, did you look at a building design that could have a flat roof? Because essentially you can eliminate the equivalent of an entire story by going with a flat roof building.
Right.
So if there were scale issues, that could be something that could be considered without changing the unit layout, the building floor plan, the footprint. So that's kind of a question that I have. Did you think about that, or is that an option for you?
To be honest, I don't recall much of a discussion with our architect about it, but I am happy to revisit it. And I know that wouldn't be an unusual look, especially even on the Carolina Beach Road corridor. I think there's some other multifamily with, either flatter roofs or flat roofs. So I'm happy to explore that.
A couple other just questions. The stormwater didn't show up on your site plan. I just want to confirm that you're handling it through a different regional pond offsite?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brian. So, yep, where Brian's pointer is located there, I guess to the north of the property, that is an existing as-built-it, accepted stormwater facility that the county has approved and said can, function and is functioning. So it has been designed to handle the impervious area for our site as an O&I. we're coming in a little under O&I imperviousness. So we know that it is sized appropriately for us, and then there's a stormwater outlet that is stubbed for our connection to it so that all of our impervious runs through that stormwater stub.
Okay. Last question, and this came up because we started talking about parking. Will you be operating any kind of private shuttle that might transport residents who don't have cars that would have to be, part of your site plan or your circulation? Is there any accommodation or need for something like that?
So we've never operated a shuttle service, but I will tell you, Wave Transit runs their micro transit service in this area. I've seen their Suburban often throughout the days. So I know that is available to our residents. It's basically like an Uber, a call and ride service. There are senior resource centers that will, and other resource centers that will offer free shuttles to our residents. But we, as a business, we do not do that.
Thanks. Commissioner Lennon?
How long do so you said you own and manage 1,100, was that?
We get just over 1,100 units.
How long do your tenants live in your facilities?
Senior residents, if I'm being honest and blunt, usually they're there until their last day.
Until they leave by other means? Okay. So years?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And all of those years are under the controls that you mentioned earlier?
That's correct.
with
Same
annual
processes.
incomes
Even if they were an original tenant.
Okay. So I'm going to ask this question because it came up in a public comment, and I saw your answer to it. But, I mean, let's be realistic. When people say affordable housing, I don't think this is what they have in mind. So, Section 8, you alluded to the fact that you may accept vouchers. Talk about that for a second.
Right. So this is not a project-based rental assistance of any kind.
So
This-
what does that mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. So it's not a housing authority property that designates, it's not a privately owned property with designated project-based. So that means every unit is subsidized by HUD or by the housing authority. This is not that. There are residents that may have a housing choice voucher, which means that they can choose where they want to live within the county. So there may be residents that have those vouchers, and we accept those vouchers. And for us, the housing authority is actually another good partner, if you will, because if we do have a problem with a resident, whether it's senior or not, we can call the housing authority and say, hey, listen, we need your help. This person is not following the rules. I know they don't want to lose their voucher, so they can help us reinforce or enforce our policies and procedures. So we look at that as a good partner to have with us.
But those residents would undergo the same qualification checks
They sure
that
do.
you
They
mentioned
sure do.
earlier.
Every resident, fair housing, every resident undergoes the same processes, whether they have a voucher or they don't.
And then my last question, I promise. How did you pick 61 as parking?
So the finance agency requires one space per unit, so that's 56. So where we could fit and tuck another few spaces in for either the staff or visitors, that's what we tried to do. So it's really just what could potentially physically fit on the property. If there's a way for us, without offending the city, to get up to 65, I'd be happy to get up to 65. I just don't know if physically the best way to do that at this point and still be an efficient community.
Thank you.
Follow-up question to the Section 8 question. The 92 people on your waiting list, are any of those Section 8? Are you working with them on there? Because I know they have waiting lists as well.
That's a good question. I don't have that number. I'm sure there probably are some individuals with Section 8 vouchers. I don't know how many of them are there, though. And in terms of our existing properties, I could get you that information or that data as well. How many of our existing residents at like Bennett Village or Lockwood Village have those vouchers? I could answer that. I just don't have that with me at the moment.
Sure, and I'm sure City Council will be curious about that as
yeah.
well.
Ding.
Great. Anything else for the applicant? Can we let her sit down for a few minutes? All right. Thank you,
All
Ms.
right.
Norris.
Thank you very much for the questions. Very good questions.
All right, at this time, I will open the public hearing on agenda item number 1, and we will start with anyone here to speak in favor of this item, and all speakers here to speak in favor of this item have 10 minutes total. So if you're invited to the podium to speak in favor of this item. Okay, I think we had one comment come in favor. We did have one public comment come in favor of this item, so from the website, as I mentioned earlier. Now we will move on to anyone who's present who wants to speak in opposition to this item. And anyone here to speak in opposition of this item, come on up to the podium, and we will start the clock when you start speaking. Come on up. And start with your name and your address, please, for the record, and make sure you sign in with Ms. Bradshaw or in the back there before you go.
And I did, thank you. Yes, my name is Michael Roach, and I'm a resident of Willoughby Park. And I'm speaking here tonight as a resident. I also serve on the board, but I did have some comments, and I've got some slides that I wanted to share to help address a couple of points. So first off, I start by saying I want to thank the Commission for allowing me to participate in some dialogue about this project. So very much appreciate that. And do I advance the slides here, or? Great, thank you. So, yeah, as I said, I'm a resident of Willoughby Park. We are in that 26-acre parcel condominium community located immediately to the south of the project site. Next slide, please. And so just stepping back to take a look at what the applicant is asking for here tonight. And as most of you know, they're looking for MD17, high-density, affordable senior housing development. And I want to take a moment to commend the applicant, because I think what they are trying to achieve is truly commendable. There is certainly a need for senior housing, affordable housing. I think they are also, as part of the design from my look at the application documents, they're doing some good things. They are taking advantage of existing and planned transportation, leveraging those aspects of the site. They are, I believe there was bicycle parking was something that I had seen in the plan. I said, oh, that's good, that gives people options. Even I think I saw some electric vehicle charging. So, you know, my hat is off in terms of conceptually what is attempting to be done here, because I think there's a real need, and I want to commend them for that. But I want to also parse some of the issues as I see it anyway. Next slide, please. So it seems to me to be a case of, as I said, their heart's in the right place. They're addressing a real, genuine need, but it might be a case of trying to do too much of a good thing. We might actually be trying to get 10 pounds of good housing in the proverbial 5-pound sack on this particular location. And so I'll parse that a little bit if I could. Next slide, please. The concerns that I have are twofold. One of them is the density of the project and the structure, the physical building itself, and how it impacts our existing built environment. Next slide, please. So just looking at the concept behind MD17 and where it applies and what it intends to achieve, as it states within the urban core, but not just the urban core, other areas as well, as at appropriate locations. And I think that's a key point to focus on here. But at the end of the day, what it seeks to achieve is a compact urban environment, as is highlighted here in the slide. And so I think we have to ask ourselves if this is an appropriate location for that compact urban environment. Next slide, please. So this is the land use and zoning map submitted with by the applicant. And what I'd like to do is kind of zoom in on those properties that are immediately abutting the project parcel. Next slide, please. So as we zoom in a little closer, this is the area that we're talking about, and this is Willoughby Park that is labeled here with a MD17 designation. Next slide, please. It may have an MD17 designation, but that is not the reality of what's built, what's on the ground today. In fact, Willoughby Park is 230 units over 26 acres. So doing the math, that actually is a density of less than 10 units per acre immediately in our community. Looking at the other two communities, working from bottom up, is at Woodridge Point, directly behind the subject property and to the north of us. Doing the math on that is 80 units over 6.14, I believe, acres for a density of 13.03 units per acre. To the north of that there's a residential parcel, I believe, that has R15 designation. My understanding is that's 2.5 dwellings per acre for R15. The point being...
5 minutes.
The point being is it's not the 30 or 36 units per acre density that the applicant was asking for. Next slide, please. So when you do the math on the MD17 designation, 17 units per acre, they've got 1.873 acres. As I do the math there, that comes to just over 31, just under 32 units maximum on a parcel of that size to conform to the MD17 designation. Next slide, please. Now, I did see, as I continued to do my research, there was an exception for that, and that was if a certain number of units, 10% of the units were designated as workforce housing. And I did not see any reference in the applicant's documents specifically targeting workforce housing. And I've got a definition here from that I pulled down for workforce housing. And workforce housing is, by definition here, between 60 and 120% of the area median income. And on the breakdown that I saw that the applicant provided, I didn't see any of the units in that range, 60 to 120% income. So, without that workforce housing element to it, it seems to me we're back to 17 units per acre as the limitation of that particular zoning designation. So that's the issue that I have with the density, and not just myself, but others in my community. Next slide, please. So the next issue then is the structure, the physical structure and how it impacts properties in Willoughby Park. Next slide, please. This is a rendering of what, and I've scaled this to some degree. It's not perfect, but to give you some idea of the building in Willoughby Park, there a couple of buildings are impacted, but this is the closest building. It's a single-story, 4-unit building that is impacted here. So next slide, please. Next slide just jumps. This is the rear elevation of the building. So this is actually the orientation that our existing Willoughby Park building would have in relation to this building, which I believe is approximately 75 feet distance between the two buildings. Next slide, please. So as I looked through the recommendations for conditional approval, one of the things that I saw repeatedly was there was a focus on maintaining or enhancing the desired character of the existing built environment. Next slide, please. And so a couple of these, several of these references actually, it continues to come up as a priority in the comprehensive plan. City in terms of growth, maintain or improve desired character, compatibility, implemented with minimal adverse impacts or on the character of the existing built environment. Next slide, please. Again, the need to protect desired neighborhood character should enhance or improve the existing physical development. 17.1.10, infill sites should be developed consistently with design elements of the nearby structures. Our single story is that nearest nearby structure in a manner that enhances or improves. Next slide, please. Areas well suited for infill should be, again, maintains or enhances desired character. Again, in 9.5.1, existing distinctive character. 9.5.5 especially says gradual building height changes should be used to ease the transition between the two areas. This is the polar opposite of that. This is a 4-story building
1 minute.
shadowing a 1-story building. It's going to be, it's going to forever change those properties, those property owners' values and their backyard to be changed forever. Next slide, please. So this is, up to this point, it's all words on paper, right? But this is what's actual situation on the ground. This is the building that I'm referring to that is impacted. Next slide, please. You'll see, as Commissioner referenced in early submittal materials, said approximately the height of the existing trees. Well, that's the red line. Imagine everything below that red line was blue sky and clouds is now a building, an apartment building. Next slide, please. The rest of this is variations on this theme. Different angle. Next slide, please. Everything below the red line is now a building, is not the blue sky that you see. Next slide, please. Same situation from a higher elevation. Next slide. Everything within that, below that red line, is now a building.
Time.
You can finish your sentence if you'd like.
There's just one more image, I believe.
Okay.
Next slide, and one more. And similar situation. So I would, one more, next slide, please. So I really do support the concept of this project. I would just ask that the commission try and find that sweet spot in right-sizing the project so that it balances the adverse impacts on the existing built environment while achieving that noble goal of affordable senior housing.
Thank you, Mr. Roach.
Thank you.
All right. The public hearing is closed. And I'd like to bring Mr. Chambers up first, and then we'll hear from the applicant again. I just have one, so go ahead. And Commissioner Lennon has a few questions about the staff report.
Yes, sir.
Actually, the gentleman actually brought this up, 1.7. In general, my question was, there were several items on the staff report where, I want to make sure my terminology is right. Since I have a history of commenting on these, I want you to know I'm reading every single part of it. The empty red arrow, which I think is moderately,
It's either modest support, modest non-support.
thank you, non-support. So this paragraph struck me because it says the need to increase housing supply, check, right, on this project?
Hey, can you remind me which are 1.7?
1.7.3.
Okay.
The need to increase housing supply, I personally would argue that's a check. Neighborhood commerce, I would say that's a check. And to mature as a city should be balanced with the need to protect desired neighborhood character, preserve historic resources, and protect the natural environment. So I'm wondering why this got downgraded by staff, because if I look at an O&I site, is an O&I project more impactful or more inconsistent with the neighborhood than a senior housing residential project?
Right. Well, when we looked at this, we gave it the modest down arrow because of two things. I think the building height, it would be one of them. Maybe the additional tree save could have been done. And then we think that could be, less parking would be appropriate. So I think that's, in this situation, that's why we gave it that arrow.
Sounds like y'all have talked about the parking a lot.
We have talked about the parking a lot.
So, but I guess, and again, and this is more of a conceptual, but it really does, I think particularly with a project like this, if you can have a 96-foot structure there and someone is proposing a 52-foot structure, is that not a more favorable outcome?
That is one way to look at it, yes. We look at it based on what's being proposed and what is around it. We don't necessarily look at what's the maximum building envelope in every situation.
Okay. I'll leave it at that because I think it's probably more of a after items from the commission conversation, but I think from, y'all have heard me say this a million times, it's so important to consider what could be done on that site today. If Chairman Lyle and I decide we want to build, we want to go build an office building, a 6-story office building there and annex into the city, we could do that, right?
That is correct. If they got it rezoned to the office institutional that would allow that, yes.
Right, in the city, right. Okay, but let's say in the county, I mean, you can't answer this because it's in the county, I know, but we could do the same thing in the county and build a 6-story office building.
Without knowing what their standards are, I would think it would be something similar, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I would love for Mr. Chambers, you to address the comment about the workforce housing AMI. They use a different workforce housing definition in the public hearing, so just address how you
Right, so
work with
it
them
would
on
be, for them to qualify for the density bonus, they would have to show us how they comply with that, and that would be part of plan review because it would be a code requirement. So if this ended up being approved, there's no possible way for that site plan to be approved without showing compliance with that part of the code, just like any other code requirement that would be reviewed.
Okay. Commissioner Lennon?
But I do think he had a point with the terminology of workforce, and I guess the distinction being this is senior.
Right, our definition would be 80% AMI, so anything underneath that would qualify as workforce for us. So it doesn't have to be 80, it can be anything below 80.
Okay.
In this case, it's 60, 50, 30.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, that's a good way to put it. Anything else for staff? And we'll get the applicant back up. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
Ms. Norris, would you join us again, please? And if there's anything you want to address from the public hearing?
So I knew the kind of the biggest concern is building height, and I appreciate that comment as a resident of New Hanover County, putting myself in their shoes. So what I also, let me see if I can get to.
Ms. Norris, can you put the mic down just a little bit? Thank you.
Back to my presentation, if possible. Trying to gather my thoughts here, too, because there's a lot of information. I know that from a building height standpoint, just going back to existing vegetation, in that the existing mature pines at roughly 70 feet, I would even argue potentially 60 feet, existing mature hardwoods at 40 feet, and our proposed building at peak of roof potentially 52 feet. So from a first or second floor perspective, if you're the resident living in the townhome immediately adjacent to this common property line, there is a dense wall of vegetation that is right out your back door. And in some cases, on the Willoughby Park property itself. Then you go beyond the Willoughby Park property another 15 feet. We have some existing dense vegetation on our subject property, and I think you can see some of the tree survey that's there. It's hard to probably see what type of tree it is to determine what the vegetation level is on that. But then we have an existing 6-foot privacy fence that will remain on the property. So in terms of a first or second floor visual, you've got vegetation and a fence. Now, yeah, if you look up above that fence, you are going to see some building, some rooftop above that. But it will be broken lines of visual perspective. Going a little further into my PowerPoint presentation, this is a picture of an existing 3-story apartment building that we have, in the vicinity of this area. So the width of that building is almost 180 feet wide. It's a 24-unit building, very similar architectural style. and the height of that building to peak is 38 feet. So we are talking about, if I do the math right, about 14 feet of difference. So even if I took a floor off, which financially would not make this property feasible, to take a whole level off, which I think that would be reducing it by 11 units perhaps. It just wouldn't make the property feasible in terms of trying to ultimately get this thing built. But these are photos of that existing vegetation, that existing buffer from the perspective of the Sterling Reserve site. So trying to look back at the Willoughby Park property, where the fence is with respect to the densest portion of the vegetation. And then from the street view, not necessarily from the back porch view, but from the street view, yes, I agree, you're going to see some of the Sterling Reserve building, but it is going to, again, have broken views with respect to the existing trees that are there. It's not going to hang over your head and cause a shadow on you. It is going to be something that you see, but it's not going to be the dominant visual.
Okay. Commissioner Lennon?
Could I ask you to go back to your red line that showed the,
Yes, sir.
sorry, I'm going to jump around a bunch.
Okay.
Okay, so how far is it from where the word existing is on the privacy fence line?
So the existing privacy fence is roughly 15 feet from the common property line.
And
Is that-
how far is it to the building?
Another 15 feet,
So it's 30 feet from
the back of the building to the common property line.
to the
Yes, sir.
common property line. Okay, then can you go back to the pictures you just had with the,
Yes, sir.
oh, right there. So that tree that has the white ribbon on it,
Yes, sir.
whose property is that on?
That is on the Sterling Reserve property.
And is that staying or going?
I believe that tree is right in the corner of where the building is going to be, so that one probably is not going to remain.
Okay, but the trees that are on the right side of the fence, so that's the Willoughby Park property?
No, sir, the trees on the right side of the fence in the immediate vicinity of the fence are still on Sterling Reserve property, approximately 15 feet of Sterling Reserve property.
And they're staying?
And they're staying,
Okay, so then go forward one more, sorry.
okay?
Yeah, okay, that's good. The top right picture. So those trees that I'm looking at over the gable, the yellow hardy gable? right
Yes,
there,
sir.
Whose are those?
Those are some combination of Sterling Reserve and Willoughby Park. I didn't want to walk into their backyards and start taking pictures along I just didn't feel comfortable with that. I'm happy to gather those pictures if they don't mind. I know it's common area back there, but it's still their property, so. But they are some combination of Willoughby Park and Sterling Reserve that I'm happy to get additional views on the Willoughby Park property for you.
But I guess, so it sounds like, and it's subject to you verifying and being able to take pictures from their side, that at least some of those trees are going to remain between the common property line and your proposed building.
Yes, sir, because if I remember the site plan correctly for Willoughby Park, and I know it's of city record because they are in the city, there is a 15-foot Type B buffer that they were required to install at the time of their construction, but then there is some additional common area from that buffer to the back of the buildings, or some additional depth from the buffer to the back of the buildings. It's probably another 25 feet or so.
Their buildings.
Their buildings, yes, sir. Now, there may not be tall trees there. There may be some trees in between buildings there, but, you know, there is some separation.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess you looked at, sounds like you did a lot of looking at various layouts for the site plan. Anything that was promising to get the four-story building a little further away from the townhouses?
We did talk about that. Let me go back to the site plan itself. So I did talk about the idea of kind of flipping the building completely around and backing it up to Sandlapper Way. And then bringing in perhaps an entry close to the stormwater pond. There's some quirky ordinance, I think there was, about the driveway placement there. So we kind of dropped the conversation at that point because that would require some additional, maybe perhaps Board of Adjustment approvals, I think. But we didn't go that much further with it.
Okay, thanks.
There may have been some other reasons that I just can't remember being put on the spot right now, but.
And turning it 90 degrees would mean all surface parking up along Carolina Beach Road, which is not ideal. There's no,
Well, and that dimension from Sandlapper to the common property line with Willoughby is not quite as long. So you'd be slicing off a number of units there, again, getting back to the financial feasibility.
Gotcha.
So I want to go back to the point you made just a minute ago. Amy, can you hear me? So flipping the property, flipping the building to the, and I'm looking at the same thing we all are, flipping that to over on the Sandlapper side, talk me through that again. Is that possible, or is it, when you said there's some quirky things, is that?
I probably would need to dig down into those notes again, just to know for sure, but I believe, and Brian, help me if I'm speaking out of turn, I believe there is a ordinance with respect to the driveway at that far location. Obviously, you wouldn't want to put the driveway close to the NCDOT right away, so it would
Right.
fall close to the stormwater pond side. There was something that would trigger a Board of Adjustment review. For me, a
Right.
Board of Adjustment, trying to fit that in the time frame that we're in right now, it would cause this to go into a cycle next year. As far as the application cycle.
Because your next deadline is, like you said, the 12th of May.
That's correct, yes, sir, yes, sir. So once that Board of Adjustment potential came up, we honestly didn't explore it further, in all honesty. If there was
Okay.
something else to it, I don't recall.
Because, I mean, I think, everybody, you get into these situations, everybody wants to try to, what's a win-win for everybody, right? And I guess my question is, let's see how to phrase this correctly. So why would the exploration of the topic that says put the building on the Sandlapper side and potential Board of Adjustment, why would that delay your funding process?
So I think just from a timing standpoint, we would not make it to the May 2nd City Council meeting. And then in order to come out with a decision that would hopefully be supportive and the rezoning approved and the annexation approved, that would allow us to go into our funding application cycle on May 12th. In other words, the agency requires all of that to be
That's
tidied
that's
away.
what I was trying to get at.
I got you.
So the May 12th application review cycle, whatever you want to call it, would require all of those boxes to have been checked.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What about the discussion that was brought up a minute ago, where if you take the building and flip it so, you at least, mitigate some of the, you're looking at the building that way versus that way versus that way. Same kind of dilemma with May 12th?
I think with that, putting it 90 degrees, maybe backing it up to Carolina Beach Road, the dimension on that side of the property, and the fact that there's a 60-foot, a 30-foot drainage easement on that side of the property, you would lose units because the building would get shorter, if you will. And losing units doesn't make the numbers and the math work in terms of the deal for the development of it.
Okay. Final question then, it's been posited to you in earlier discussions about, you're talking about, what was it, 56, or what was the height?
The park, or the 52 feet?
52 feet?
Yes, sir.
Mitigating some of that by the slope of the roof. I think Commissioner Adams brought up the question about, even to a flat roof. I mean, does that discussion, does that type of an investigation put this project off track for May 12th?
That's a good question. If I have to explore that, would I have to come back to this body? Or would that just be a condition of approval of this body?
Mr. Chambers, what do you think about that?
I think that would just be a recommendation from this commission moving forward.
That's what I was thinking, it was like
Okay.
one of the conditions of approval is that.
A recommendation or?
Recommendation, thank
a,
you, yeah,
uh,
that's the
condition.
right word. Yeah, thank you.
Any condition that this commission wants to add would be a recommendation brought forward to city council, and that could include the exploration of a flat
see.
roof.
Okay. That's all I've got.
Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I mean, again, going through this process myself, there were, I mean, we can, I guess, have recommendations on building height, right? Not just stories. So I would think that there could be a way that as part of our recommendation, a recommended maximum height that would be something that is equivalent to a flat roof could be part of our discussion. I mean, the last thing I want to do is dictate architecturally what someone can or can't do, because I don't think we're in that business. But there might be, again, through recommendations of overall height and scale, keeping 4 stories, but doing it in a different way.
So you're saying instead of recommending a flat roof, recommending a certain building height?
Yeah, I mean, you could recommend a max height that basically is equivalent to 4 stories.
Commissioner Lennon?
There's no way in the world I'm going to vote for anything that asks her to go back and revise her site plan at this point. I think she's had multiple meetings with staff. They're providing 56 units of affordable senior housing, which is exactly what we've asked everybody to do. And this building is exponentially less impactful than what could be built there. That's where I'm at.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Ms. Norris. Want to follow up with Commissioner Lennon's comments and put it in context. The way we look at these decisions typically is what is the most intense use by right for what's there now versus what the applicant is proposing versus what is empty lot or what is there now compared to what the applicant is proposing. So, and we've done a lot of incentivizing in our codes to get developments just like this. So part of a growing city and a city that can't grow out by annexation, involuntary annexation, we need to grow up to accommodate our growth in residents and projected growth in residents and projected growth in need of units like this. So what would the other commissioners, where are y'all?
Don't you need to close the public hearing first, and then we can talk?
Yeah, I already closed the
Did you
public
do it?
hearing.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
That was a long time ago.
Okay, fine. I didn't hear it, but that's fine.
Yeah, the applicant was not part of the public hearing. That was after. But thank you for watching out. Thanks for having me back. Any other?
Yeah, this is interesting
Are we-
because I think the applicant, and I think this is a site plan that, as you just said, actually is in the direction of what the whole comprehensive plan and what the goals of the city are all about. Right, wrong, or different, I mean, that's where it's at. I mean, I think we've talked here tonight about exploring different, turn the building this way, put the building on the other side of the lot. But I think all of those, while intellectual discussions, are probably not feasible, to try to accommodate the ultimate goal, which is provide senior housing. So I'm trying to pick this thing apart, and I'm struggling picking it apart, to be honest. So.
Commissioner Goins?
Based on the location of the project and the affordability of it being near Monkey Junction and putting in the walkways, I think it's a good project for the community. Sorry. The site itself, it's a very difficult place to develop. The construction costs are going to be pretty high, so if it stayed as an O&I and something's going to be built there, it would probably be a big structure, as Commissioner Lennon has put forth. So the economics of it are going to drive this piece to have a big building on it, in my opinion. Either way, if it's not this project, as it is currently zoned, another big building.
Thank you. All right, what is the will of the commission?
How would we go about incorporating in any recommendations on building scale?
Sure, we could just add that to the motion. That's how we do it.
But that wouldn't be a condition, right?
Well, what Mr. Chambers was saying is the whole thing is our recommendation to City Council, and
Agreed.
to ride along on that recommendation to City Council would be adding it to the conditions.
I understand that, but when council gets their package, would it be listed as a condition under conditional district rezoning, or would it be in the staff report?
It would be in the staff report as a condition recommended by this commission.
So it would be called out specifically that way.
It would
So
be called out
You're
specifically.
using the word condition, so,
We have on page 5 of the staff report. Is that right, Brian? We would just add it, it would just be added.
Right, it would be number 6, and we would call it out as a condition that this commission recommended be added. And then council would act on whether they wanted to include that or not.
And if if the person making the motion up here would like to include that, just make it part of your motion, and the other commissioners can vote for or against the motion. As a whole, yeah. Right, so whoever's first to make the motion will get things started.
I'll do it.
Commissioner Lennon.
I said I wasn't going to vote for it, but as long as it's a recommendation, I'll do so.
You have to do that.
What's that?
That's up to you, you don't have to.
I want it to go to city council. Madam Chair, I'd like to recommend approval of agenda item number 1, the rezoning of 5029 Carolina Beach Road, initial zoning, to MD17 conditional district. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington, the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because this proposal would apply an appropriate zoning classification that would accommodate an affordable housing project. The site is in proximity to a variety of commercial services and near transit services along Carolina Beach Road. I'd further move that we add a recommendation in staff's report to council that this body not unanimously recommended consideration of building height.
Say that again?
Would, Mr. Chambers looks like he would like to help you with the language on that.
I'm going to need a little more than that. we need a specific recommendation for that. I guess if it's a particular height, if
Commissioner
it's a
Adams,
flat
did you have a
roof.
height, a maximum height in mind?
So typically in wood frame residential construction, you're between 10 and 11 feet floor to floor. So I would think that if you capped the height at 45 feet as opposed to 52, that pretty much will put you into a flat roof design scenario.
Do I have to say all this over again? So I would make the motion that I made with the revision to the end that staff include in its report to council a recommendation by the majority of the planning commission to consider a building height not to exceed 45 feet.
It would be, if the commission voted in favor of this motion, it would be a maximum height of 45 feet. It wouldn't be so much as the majority of the commission. They would get the vote as it's passed forward. So you would just need to make that condition to 45 feet.
I really don't want to do that. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to strike the modification of my motion and just move the approval, the recommended approval of the project as I read up to the point ending in transit services along Carolina Beach Road.
And just those 5 conditions on page 5.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we worked hard for this one. Commissioner Lennon made a motion to approve agenda item number 1, second by Commissioner Pollock, and we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Ms. Norris. Good luck with your project. Rolling right along to agenda item number 2. And Commissioner Goins has requested a recusal from this item based on conflict of interest. Can I get a motion to recuse Commissioner Goins, please?
I make a motion that Commissioner Goins be recused for conflict of interest.
Thank you. Commissioner Pollock, do we have a second? Commissioner Lennon, second. And all in favor, say aye.
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 Commissioner Goins, you can stick around just in the gallery and join us after we vote. All right, item number 2 is conditional district rezoning of properties containing 2.45 acres located at 2402, 2406, 2420 South 17th Street and 1608 Wellington Avenue from O&I Office and Institutional District and CB/CD Community Business Conditional District to CB/CD Community District Conditional District for a proposed general retail use with associated fuel pumps and a restaurant. And we have welcome Ms. Bonavac to the Planning Commission, and we have the staff to deliver the staff report.
Yes, and thank you so much for being here tonight. So good evening, Chairwoman and Commissioners. This site is located on the southwest corner of South 17th Street and Wellington Avenue and contains approximately 2.44 acres and is currently occupied by 2 commercial structures and an office. This map shows the general vicinity surrounding the request. And these are photos of the subject property. These are photos of the adjacent properties and land uses. The site is currently zoned O&I, Office and Institutional, and Community Business Conditional District, CB/CD. The site is bordered by Office and Institutional to the north, east, and west. The Community Business Conditional District is to the south. Commercial uses are located to the north and south, with offices to the east and west. The site will be used for general retail with associated fuel pumps and restaurant. The gas station will utilize an entrance along South 17th Street, Wellington Avenue, and Harbor Drive. This would close a driveway on Wellington Avenue and on South 17th Street. The gas canopy is located behind the building, meeting the frontage and accessory use conditions. To exceed the maximum parking allowed, a parking analysis will need to be provided in order to demonstrate the need for additional parking. Elevations show entrances along Wellington Avenue and along South 17th Street. The site is located within a live-work innovation zone principles, which is the area of opportunity, and along a high-capacity transit route, Transit That Works, on the Comprehensive Plan's Growth Strategies map. Wellington Avenue is a special character street, and South 17th Street is a major corridor and regional parkway. Staff believes that the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the recommendations of the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan, and that the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Staff recommends conditional approval with conditions listed in the case summary be applied. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. The applicant is here as well, and they do have a presentation.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant at this time? Sorry, she's staff. She's so new to me, she looks like an applicant popping up here. Any questions for staff?
I apologize,
Commissioner Lynn?
I blacked out for a second. Will you go back to the site plan? I just
Absolutely.
want to be clear on which driveways. I think some of your text is covering up
Yes.
some of the driveway cuts that are being closed off.
Absolutely. So I can take you to the aerial. I think that would be slightly easier to see the aprons.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. And so they are closing the one there and those there, and actually placing a new entrance.
To the south.
That is correct.
So closing 2, opening 1.
That is correct.
Okay. And then on Wellington, there's just one now?
There are 2 there, and they're shifting the entrance down. If I may slightly go forward again, you can see here it is more towards the left side of the property.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Adams?
Can you elaborate a little bit about the 5 spaces for neighbors in that little panhandle piece of the site? It looks like, is cross-parcel connectivity still being planned, or what's going on there?
Sure. So I can speak a little bit about that, but I will let the applicant explain. I believe that actually came from some of the neighbors' concerns, and I believe they're actually looking to share that parking space to have that remain, but I will let them expand on that for you.
One last question.
Yes, sir.
Were any elevations or any design materials submitted about the canopy itself? Because sometimes the canopy's bigger and more sort of architecturally prominent than the building themselves?
Sure. So the frontage standards are going to apply to the building itself. So I did not receive any elevations at this time regarding the fuel canopy. But again, the engineer is here, and I believe they can speak to the design that they have for that, or if you guys had any specific concerns.
I have a question about the parking, and
Yes, ma'am.
it was spelled out pretty well, explained pretty well in the staff report why it's showing almost twice the maximum parking allowed. Tell us a little bit about the analysis to allow that extra parking, even though if it's approved by city council like this, in TRC it could be reduced, but we wouldn't be allowed, it wouldn't be more. Is that
Sure.
right?
So the parking analysis actually has to be accepted by TRC. So what they would have to do is prior to even getting to City Council, they would need to submit that and have that be reviewed. Compliance with that can indicate, for instance, the restaurant portion. So 1 parking space per 65 square feet. The applicant has informed us that they are not utilizing any indoor space for the restaurant. If they were utilizing the restaurant space inside, that could increase their parking. So by utilizing only the outdoor seating, for instance, they're going to have to demonstrate that need for those additional parking in that report. And then, like you said, TRC may say that they, or staff may review that and, again, discuss concerns. They would have to have that accepted in order to proceed.
Commissioner Pollock? I see you getting close to your mic.
Was it that obvious? Where's the outdoor seating for the restaurant here?
Absolutely. So it is a little bit difficult to see on your screen, but there are picnic tables along the, where you see the Arrow Foundation plantings. To the left of that, there are picnic tables out there.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Great job, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll welcome the applicant to the podium at this time.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My name is Sam Potter. I'm an attorney here in Wilmington, and I have with me today on the right Nadine Shovels. She is the engineer with Kimley Horn out of Virginia, and Payman Nadimi. I've been practicing his name over and over again. He is with Wawa, and Wawa is the intended user of this site. I represent the developer who would then lease the property to Wawa. So, with that being said, Wawa is new to our area. This would be the first Wawa in eastern North Carolina. I think I may have misspoke on that. I think they just opened one in, is it Kill Devil Hills? Groundbreaking in Kill Devil Hills, so the first Wawa in eastern North Carolina. But Wawa is an absolute institution in the eastern Pennsylvania, Delaware area, and it's sort of something like we've not really seen here before, where it's not really a gas station, although it sells gas. It is a place where you can go and buy hot food. It has an actual restaurant in it. They sell burgers and all kinds of things. And in Pennsylvania, there's this war between people who love Wawa and people who love Sheetz, which is another one that's coming to town. It's sort of like the difference between Dunkin' and Tim Hortons in the Northeast. You like one or the other. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out this new contraption here, and I'm not doing a good job at it. All right, sorry you're seeing the whole thing. Wawa, what does it bring to the community? Wawa is a private company, but it's 40% owned by its associates. The employees there participate in a 401k with competitive living wages and an employee stock ownership program. After construction is complete, it'll have approximately 50 employees at each Wawa. So this is, again, not your, many of you might be envisioning your sort of standard convenience store where there's a clerk and maybe one other person there, but this is a much bigger operation than that with many more employees. We talked about the food already. It's fresh, made-to-order hoagies. So this is something people working at the hospital might come to grab lunch, that type of thing. Thank you. Can we do next slide? So what's great about this project, as y'all are sitting there thinking about this, just for reference, this is where the Pizza Hut is currently on the corner of Wellington and 17th Street. And then there are 3 other buildings that will be demolished as part of this redevelopment. The property, the buildings that are there and the developments that are there were developed prior to the current stormwater standards. So one of the main things and one of the main concerns we've heard from neighbors is the existing stormwater running off the property onto adjacent properties. So we're totally modernizing the site. We're bringing it up to current stormwater standards, and Ms. Shovels can certainly speak to any questions you have about that. But it's been modeled for the 25-year storm, I'm sorry, it's developed for the 25-year storm, and modeling has been done for the 100 and the 50-year storm event. Staff had explained earlier a little bit about the traffic management. That we're doing away with not only 2 accesses to Wellington and 17th Street, but we're moving those accesses further away from the light there, which will make it safer both to enter with traffic slowing down and to exit with the light changing. And then internally, it's hard to see it here. Let's see if I can. Internally, there is an existing access between the property to the west and the existing site, and that is being deleted as well. So there are not only deletions on the thoroughfares, but also internal. So there are less turn-ins and turn-outs to the property. And that's it. So we've got the design team here to speak to that, and we've got Paymon as well here from Wawa to answer any questions you may have about Wawa.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Lennon?
I'm dying to know the answer to Commissioner Adams' question about the 5 parking spaces.
Can you repeat your question?
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Nadine Shovels.
Yeah, I was just asking about those panhandle parking spaces in the rear.
Yes.
What's going on there?
So in our neighborhood meeting with the neighbors, there was some concerns brought up about how our site may impact parking on their site, if perhaps Wawa customers may be moving on to their site, or if maybe their people who are visiting their doctor's offices may want to park on our site. So that is one reason why we are asking for an alternative parking study to increase parking on our sites. We're not impacting them. And then we're also going to be giving up those 5 parking spaces to accommodate our neighbors' wishes.
Commissioner Lennon?
So I'm sorry, so the project's in red, but the black outline that goes, I guess that's west and then south and then back to the east, that's actually
Yeah.
part of your,
So our parcel is kind of backwards L-shaped. So that square that's in
Okay.
black is in our parcel, but we are purchasing it and dedicating it to our neighbors for their use.
okay, and there won't be, I'm sorry, I think you said this already, but there will or will not be interconnectivity,
There will not be any interconnectivity there.
but you're providing all of that, okay.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you.
Commissioner Adams?
Are you guys dealing with stormwater completely underground?
No, so we're kind of hitting it in 4 different components. So water quality, we'll be treating it off-site through the Silver Stream Water Quality Facility. For water quantity, just to make sure that we're not causing any flooding issues or making any existing flooding issues worse, we're proposing an infiltration pond on site, which will be above ground, but we're going to be utilizing the existing soils on site, which are sandy, so most of the water will just seep into the ground. As far as conveyance goes, we are proposing a full new pipe system on site, just bringing it up to date to make sure that it can convey these bigger storm events. And then we're also running a check storm, which is above and beyond what the Wilmington ordinances require. So that's looking at the 100-year storm event, which is kind of your hurricane-level storm event, to make sure that in the case that that happens, we're not pushing water onto our neighbors' sites.
So basically that dashed line on kind of the southeast corner is above grade stormwater
Yes.
management?
Yeah.
Okay. This may be a question for your other client, but I just want to understand more, and our chairman brought this up too, about the need for over 2 times the amount of allowable parking. Very kind of curious about that.
Payman Nadimi. I'm a real estate project engineer with Wawa, and thank you for the opportunity to present our case to you today. So, as was mentioned earlier, we are not a typical gas station business. About half of our business, more than half of our business, is actually the food business. But unlike a restaurant where you have a dine-in, most of our food is to go, right? People come in, they gas up, or sometimes they just come in, park, order the food, and leave. So the calculation that the city code looks at for parking for a restaurant is based on seating area, right? And because we don't have a seating area, we're not being allowed the parking that we need for our food business and for our food customers, to allow them to come, park, go inside, visit the restroom if they need to, order the food, collect the food, and then leave the site. So that's why we're doing this parking study, to show to the TRC, to the commission, and to the council the need for the parking that we have. And it's a very unique situation, right? We are not a typical gas station, and the way the city code is written currently, it essentially is designed for a typical gas station that doesn't account for a type of gas station that we have that is as much a restaurant as it is a gas station.
So your study is going to be based on some of the other Wawas?
It will. So we have chosen 3 of the closest Wawas to North Carolina market. So we've picked the Chesapeake, Virginia market, just across the border from us in Virginia. That's our closest stores. We're studying those. We are going to have hard data to share on our usage of our customers for their parking spaces in those stores.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up question, Commissioner Lennon?
He stole my thunder.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we have no more questions for the applicant, we will open the public hearing, and we'll start with anyone who is here to speak in favor of this item. If you're here to speak in favor of this item, come on up to the podium. All right. Is anyone here to speak in opposition to agenda item number 2? If you're here to speak in opposition, come up to the podium, start with your name and address, and we will start the timer. And you have 10 minutes for all comments in opposition.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Young. I represent Wellington Point. If the map was up, Wellington Point is west of the proposed property. We've had negotiations, several with Wawa so far, and they've been fruitful. We've gone through several items in terms of crime and concern about Wawa sells alcohol 24/7. And Wawa's has 18 gas pumps. This is a 5,500 square foot retail building. Is that correct? Yes. So there's a lot of traffic in and out. And fundamentally, the problem that this site has is there's no way out of this site to turn left on 17th Street. And even if they're moving over, I think earlier the presentation by the city, they really don't have direct access to Harbor Drive. They have to go through, on the south end, Food Lion's driveway parking lot. So if you look to the south of the proposed Wawa site, there's an exit where if they turn left, they access the Wellington Point parking lot, and that gives them access to Wellington Drive. And that's the only way that they can turn left onto 17th Street. And so we've had some very good negotiations with Wawa, and I think that some things have been settled. Our concern still is I think those negotiations are incomplete. We'd like to see a way to divert traffic away from the Wellington Point right-of-way and the Wellington Point parking lot. And obviously this is a large volume project that's coming in, a large retail space, 18 pumps, and we're very concerned about the traffic going through our parking lot. We have 5 medical offices, 2 of which are pediatric. My office, older patients, wheelchairs, and younger patients in the parking lot. And we have significant concerns about safety of our parking lot in the right-of-way. George?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Young. Anyone else here to speak in opposition to agenda item number 2?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jason Ruth. I own Tiny's Tavern. It was a nice presentation by the Wawa folk. What they failed to tell you all is that 2420, that unit there, there's 4 mom and pop businesses that are owned that are going to be torn down. PT's Grill, which is a real restaurant that's been there for 20 years. My business, which has been there for 17 years. A hair salon, which has been there for over 5 years, and a surgical place that's located in that building. The other thing that they failed to mention to you all, there are 4 gas stations within a 2-mile radius. They can call it a restaurant, they can call it what they want. It's a gas station. If you do the research into it, you will find it's a gas station. It's a monstrosity. The people in that neighborhood need mom and pop businesses. That's what we are. We're not major corporations, we're not out-of-towners. We've been there all these years, we built our businesses by hand, and now they're coming in to take those businesses away. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Ruth.
You're welcome.
Anyone else here to speak in opposition to agenda item 2? Anyone else here to speak on agenda item number 2? The public hearing is now closed. And we will invite the applicant to come back up to address any of the public hearing comments.
Thank you. With respect to Dr. Young's concerns, I think there might be a misunderstanding. There is direct access from this site, from the site that's in front of you today, to Wellington. There is a turn-in in the very left side, I guess the western section right below where it says permeable pavement on your screen currently. And that was one of the things I mentioned during the initial presentation, is that we're closing the existing access to Wellington, which is closer to 17th Street, and moving it further away from the 17th Street light, but there is still direct access. There is no internal access from this proposed site to the doctor's office to the west. So I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding about that. You can see it clearly on your site plan. Yes, Mr. Woodruff.
Sam, where is his office on this diagram?
It's to the west, so if you see where it says 4-foot ornamental fence on your screen, that's his parking lot, or that's the doctor, it's a condominium parking lot, and off of your screen, sort of to the left of that, is where his office is. And so when Commissioner Adams was asking questions about the black area, well, I guess it's the L, reverse L, immediately above that is the doctor's office, sort of to the northwest, so to speak. And that parking area that we were talking about, the 5 spots in the area that juts off to the left, is actually on the property our client is purchasing, and we're granting just a technical term, a permanent parking easement for those parking spots to the doctor's office so they have more parking. But there is no internal direct access from the subject property to the doctor's office, and there is direct access from the subject property to Wellington. And just quite frankly, there's no reason why somebody would drive to the south through Food Lion to the west and then north to drive through the doctor's office property. If they're visiting this site and they want to access Wellington, they're going to do it through this site.
Is there a stoplight there?
There is a stoplight there, which is also, that's another point, is that's how you turn left on the 17th. You go out to Wellington, take a left at the stoplight.
Great. Commissioner Lennon?
So I think you said it, I just want to be crystal clear. Even though this shows up as one parcel right
Yes.
here, the reverse L, let's call it that, is in no, there's no access between the, okay, there we go. There's no access on the west side to that black hatched square.
There is today, but there will not be as developed. We're closing it off. There's a fence that's going to run down.
So
that
those
side.
parking spaces, although your client will own them, and you use the word permanent, so that's a permanent parking
An
easement?
easement, that's correct.
Okay.
There'll be an easement recorded, that's
Okay.
correct.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm sorry.
Sure. Commissioner Lennon?
The gentleman who spoke about the businesses there, were those respective businesses condominiums? Was there a single owner to that building?
So there's a single owner to that building. The businesses there are tenants of that owner, and that owner is under contract to sell their building to our client.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Where are we on this one? Deliberation. Mr. Adams?
I guess I'll jump in first. I know in a lot of cases, we talk about what can be done by right on sites. But this is one of the projects where I look at it in a different lens, because we're not necessarily talking about a by right sort of allowable thing. We're being asked to look at a very conditional, use for this. My real concerns with this are really about highest and best use of land. The staff report talks a lot about the opportunity areas and a lot of the goals that are, aspirational in terms of what happens on those sites. The live work, the innovation, compatible uses. I think about the hospital, all the medical other uses there. I really question the compatibility of this as the highest and best use in this corridor. So that is one major issue for me. There's also been discussion about traffic. Further back in the report, it talks about 2 blocks away, the level of service is a level F on 17th Street. And if any of us have sat on traffic there, we know that to be true. And if you look at the projections about some of the proposed traffic, it's really significant. So it's hard for me to understand how this will not exacerbate a situation that is less than ideal in terms of traffic in that area now.
Mr. Lennon?
I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I think, I'm trying not to color this too much, but I think that, the first time I ever went to one of these facilities, respectfully, the gentleman who said this is just a gas station, that's not correct, in my humble opinion, having been to these before. It's kind of weird, but it works. And so I look at it as an ideal service to the whole area, another opportunity for those medical people to go and buy food and leave and not have to create huge parking fields for people to sit for an hour or two.
Mr. Lennon, I'm sorry, can you talk into your microphone a little bit better? Thank you.
And I do appreciate the highest and best use. I think given the fact that it's on the commercial corridor, I, for one, would argue that I think medical office occupancy in that area is not fantastic. So I don't know that more office buildings necessarily are the highest and best use for that. So I think it does serve a purpose, and it's indicative of the growth and new companies picking Wilmington. So that's my 2 cents. I also just wanted to say, if they can sell alcohol 24/7, that's something new in the ABC laws, too. That comment was made. So I don't think they can sell alcohol 24/7.
Yeah, didn't think so either. And I don't necessarily disagree with the comments brought up in the public hearing about supporting small businesses. That's not really up to us. That's up to the landowner who is making those decisions, and that's not something that this body is here to enforce. All right, Commissioner Woodruff?
I'm prepared to make a motion, if appropriate.
Sure.
I move for approval of agenda item number 2, rezoning 2402, 2406, 2420 South 17th Street, and 1608 Wellington Avenue from O&I and CBCD to CBCD. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the proposal would allow for a compatible commercial use along a major thoroughfare and near large employment centers. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request. And are there conditions? I assume there are.
Yes. Just had them.
And conditions provided by staff?
There are 6 conditions.
I'll second that.
Motion was made by Commissioner Woodruff to approve agenda item number 2, seconded by Commissioner Pollock. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Passes, how many are up to here now? 4-1.
Chairperson Lau, we need to take a break to give the captioners
Closed captioners, got it.
a break.
Thank you. We will take, is 5 or 10 minutes? What do they need? 10 minutes. We will be back in 10 minutes. So 8:17. All right, welcome back to the Planning Commission meeting for April 5th. We're on agenda item number 3. Which is Land Development Code maintenance to amend the Land Development Code for various amendments and cleanup items related to building and site design, landscaping and uses. And Mr. Chambers is back up to the podium to deliver the staff's report.
Good evening again. The Land Development Code was adopted in 2021. Following adoption, staff has continued to review and monitor the document for errors and the elements that do not work in implementation. Staff has identified another series of cleanup items and amendments that are needed to correct these errors and then correct those issues that we've discovered during implementation. So your amendments are organized into 3 broad categories: building and site design, landscaping, and then cleanups and clarifications. I will point out that 2 of the amendments that are in this package were submitted by council members outside of their normal process, and since they came in at basically the right time, we just decided to include those with the amendments tonight. One would be for the piers and the docks, and the others would be for the gas canopies. So for the building and site design amendments, this would revise the cross-access requirements for commercial parking lots. It would revise the architectural design standards for multiple dwelling districts. It would establish transit shelter requirements for large-scale developments. It would revise the design standards for gas station canopies, and that's one of those council amendments. It would eliminate the density restriction for cluster subdivisions within our conservation or resource protection areas. And then it would also amend the definition of an accessory structure for residential docks and piers. And that is the other council requested amendment. For landscaping, it would revise our parking lot landscaping and shade coverage requirements. It would amend the planning requirements for streetscape landscaping standards, and then revise our specimen tree removal in the industrial districts. And then finally, for our cleanup and clarifications, there will be a revision to the floodplain waiver standards to clarify the standards for approval, revise our use tables for the vehicle use types, revise certificate of appropriateness requirements for our historic districts to align with our statutory authority. And then 13 is similar to that, where we're revising our variance authority to align with statutory authority. Finally, there's 3 amendments that were not presented at the work session. These were added on. They were included in your packet. They went out last week. I just wanted to point out their ordinance corrections. The 14 and 15 are ordinance corrections that were previously approved, but somehow did not make it into the final ordinance that went forward. So we're just correcting those errors with this ordinance. And then finally, the last would be to align the definitions for single dwelling unit and housekeeping units. So staff has identified several items we'd like to call out and provide more detail. We have information for all of these, all 16 amendments. So we would like to just go through the few that were most discussed at our work session that are the more substantial amendments. And we can answer questions about those, but I just want to make sure you're aware we can go through any one of the 16th in as much detail as you would like. So with that, the first amendment was for the cross-access require. The code currently requires cross-access connections between parking lots on adjacent non-residential sites. So the intent of this is to limit vehicle conflicts on our roadways and then allow customers to make multiple stops without re-entering the roadway. Through the application of this, it became apparent to us that it's not necessary in some cases, and it's really not practical along our secondary collector streets. It's more appropriate for our arterial streets. So what this amendment would do would limit the access requirement to commercially zoned properties along our arterial streets in the city. And that map you see on the screen is the commercial corridors that we've identified that it would be applied to. Those are generally the major arterials across town. That is what staff is proposing. If there's any questions or suggestions about how that might be amended, we're open to hear it, but that's the map that's being proposed right now, is identified commercial corridors. The next amendment we'd like to call out would be the amendment to the multiple dwelling district design standards. As discussed at the work session, there are some very prescriptive design elements that are being required right now. We propose to kind of strike those and give a more more flexible approach to the design guidelines. So this is what would be stricken, and this is what would be proposed. We did try to incorporate the discussions we had with Mr. Adams at that meeting. So this A, B, C, and D is what would be the replacement of those design standards for the multiple dwelling districts. The next one would be for transit stop routes, transit stop improvements on our transit routes. Our comprehensive plan identifies several high-capacity transit routes that are identified for improved and increased transit service. Those are identified on the map, and I know it's hard to see on this screen. It's the light yellow corridors are identified high-capacity transit routes. The plan supports higher density development along these corridors to establish and contribute to the demand to operate and improve this transit system. There have been several large-scale developments approved along these routes, and some of those approvals have included conditions for improved or adding a new transit stop. One would be, an example would be the Avenue. There was a condition that they needed to relocate and make a transit stop improvement. That was a condition of the approval. However, there is not a transit stop improvement that's in our code. So when we go out and try to enforce that condition, we're relying on the applicant to work with WAVE separately because we don't have a code requirement to do that. And sometimes those negotiations fall apart for whatever reason. This would establish in the code a requirement for those types of developments. And as we talked about at the work session, it would be based on whether they're located on a high-capacity transit route, and then it would be based on the number of trips that are generated from those proposals. There's also item 4 where if there's already existing transit stop there, obviously you wouldn't be required to put one in if there's one within a quarter mile. And again, the part B of this are the required improvements that would be part of that transit stop. So item number 4 is the gas station fuel canopies. The Land Development Code requires fuel pumps to be located behind the front plane of the building. The goal of this provision was aimed to improve the form, function, and aesthetics of development along the corridors. These provisions include placing the buildings and accessory uses and parking, placement of buildings, accessory uses and parking, I'm sorry. And the code currently includes standards for this placement of fuel pumps and canopies, in relation to the location of that principal structure. So what you see on your screen is an example of how that would lay out with the front plane of the canopy behind the front plane, the canopy behind the front plane of the convenience store up on the corner. We do have a couple of examples of how this has occurred in town. This would be the 7-Eleven that was approved for construction on Market Street in Birchwood. And then we also have what you've seen earlier tonight, the Wawa satisfied this requirement. Staff received a request from council member to amend the code, which identified concerns with safety, access, internal circulation with the application of this standard. Staff does understand the concern and offers an alternative that may both continue to improve the form and aesthetics along our corridors and alleviate the safety and circulation concerns identified with this request. This alternative would exempt sites with less than 200 feet of road frontage from the limitation on the canopy location and acknowledge that requiring such a placement on those smaller parcels could force the canopies to be located behind the principal structure where they would not be visible from the street. The next one would be our parking lot landscaping. The landscaping standards include provisions for minimum parking lot shading and parking lot tree plantings. These standards are established to preserve and enhance the urban tree canopy, provide parking areas, shading to reduce heat island effects, help manage stormwater, and improve air quality, and then improve the overall human health. To achieve this, the code includes includes shade area amounts based on the type of tree to determine the amount of shade a tree can reasonably be expected to provide. The code also requires trees and landscape islands within parking areas. These islands are required at the end of each parking row and for every 12 spaces within a parking row. This provision has created some challenges in design for some private parking lots, particularly with multiple dwelling development projects. The number of required islands required within a road limits the number of parking spaces that can be provided to meet the code requirements as well as market demand. So as a result of this, staff has proposed several changes that would provide additional options to meet this planning requirement. The proposed amendment would revise the parking lot shading and landscaping standards to clarify how these areas are calculated and provide more flexibility in meeting the shading and tree planting requirements. So the table you see on the top kind of spells out each situation you would find in a parking lot, whether it be around the perimeter, corner island, interior island, and it assigns a certain amount of shading for each situation. It also provides an additional bonus of shading for protected trees that are protected on site. So if you're saving a tree for a landscaping requirement, you get more credit towards that shading requirement. The bottom graphic is just an illustration of how that would play out on a typical parking lot. All right, so the next item we'd like to call out would be the specimen trees in the industrial district, and we heard you loud and clear that you wanted a map of the industrial areas, so here you go. The purple areas on the map are our industrial areas in town. The Land Development Code defines a specimen tree as any live oak, pond cypress, bald cypress, or longleaf pine that is equal to or greater than 24 inches in diameter. The code currently requires Board of Adjustment approval for the removal of any of these trees, regardless of where it's located in whatever zoning district it might be in. The industrial districts include many by right uses that require large vehicle access and navigation across the site. Large laydown yards, intense industrial activities are not generally conducive to the tree retention interior to the site. The requirement for Board of Adjustment approval for specimen tree removal has resulted in some unnecessary delays in several large-scale industrial projects, including some industrial economic development projects. The proposed amendment would remove this requirement from the I&D district. The removal of specimen trees in these areas would continue to require tree mitigation. Furthermore, with regard to trees, the code does require mitigation for the removal of protected trees. The mitigation can be satisfied by additional tree plantings, a payment in lieu, tree credits, or a combination of these options. The amount of mitigation satisfied by the tree plantings is based on the total caliper inches of trees planted. So the larger tree that you plant, the more mitigation credits you receive. The Land Development Code requires landscaping trees to be a minimum of 2 inches in caliper at the time of planting. So in some cases, we have developers that plant larger trees. So if you planted a 4-inch tree, this amendment would allow the 2 inches above the minimum required to count towards a mitigation credit. That is all for the main ones we wanted to cover with you in detail. I'm happy to answer any questions about these or any of the other amendments included in the package.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I would like to, at this time, go back and I have a couple circled to bring up for discussion, and certainly other commissioners can add to that. And we'll start with Amendment 1 with the parking lot location and access. My question from the work session, we had an example of an existing building with surface parking in the front along a corridor, and a proposed building that they wanted to bring to the front, but they weren't allowed to because they had to connect. And I didn't want us to overlook a little more important goal, which is to urbanize some of these areas and have the buildings closer to the road. And if we have an opportunity for someone to bring a building closer to the road and put parking in the back, I don't want to discourage that. So is that something that's been addressed in anywhere?
It's not specifically addressed in this amendment.
we could probably add some language where it would be superseded by maybe a frontage standard or something like that, if that's a concern.
It is. It's a concern. So, how would,
It's, in my mind, the issue is you've got multiple frontage standards that can be applied, and they are all perfectly compliant with the code. To write a statement that kind of predicts what that frontage standard is going to be applied for a particular use might be difficult.
well, my concern is that they wouldn't be allowed to, that there'd be conflict in the codes. If we're requiring the cross-access and they can't meet the frontage requirements because of the access requirement, so that there would be some kind of conflict with our goals there.
Well, in this case, I guess we could add a statement that when not in conflict with frontage standards or something to that extent. I mean, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff here as a possible change, so.
We could certainly have others weigh in. Commissioner Lennon?
I would be in favor of, I have a whole nother issue about cross easements, but that's probably better for a work session again. I think we made a lot of progress in that work session. I thought it was very helpful, but
Absolutely.
I would agree with the chair. This would be one I'd be more than happy to delay and talk about some more. That's just my personal thought.
Anyone else? Commissioner Adams?
I think the heart of this issue for all of us was having incompatible, like, site plans, basically. Because we don't want this proverbial tail wagging the dog with what could be a better site plan just because we're forced to have a cross-access easement. I mean, I don't know if there's a way that part of this can be, you know, when there are compatible site plans between a new and an existing or something, because if you can eliminate the potential conflict between existing and new, that, in my mind, goes a long way towards what I think we're all afraid is going to happen.
It's like putting new wine into old wine skins or something. Read your Bible. So, is the consensus to strike this one from going to City Council and looking at it again?
I mean, it kind of sounds like it is. It sounds like there's enough question here. I mean, it sounds like it's probably the right thing to do.
We're not quite there yet.
Not quite ready to take this upward.
Well, just
Miss-
question, I mean, in fairness to staff, is what they've presented, I mean, not enough? Like, we need something more?
Right, we need to give them
So are we okay
clear.
with what they have done? I'm just asking, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think we're all in favor of the intent to try to limit more road access, but I think it's too vague and too blanket, sort of as currently presented.
That's a good way to put it. Do you need more guidance to?
We always need more guidance. That's a standing order. I will say that this is a current code requirement, so we are tightening it up from what it currently is, which is a bigger blanket. So I just want to put that out there. I think we can take this back and maybe add some language that kind of follows a sequential path where you get to where that cross-access should be located. We just need to identify what those items are that lead you there.
Right, because I'd want it to be able to be handled at staff level. I wouldn't want them to have to come here
Right, so
or
there
go
needs
to
to be
Board of
like
Adjustment.
a hierarchy or a priority of, you need to make this access, but you consider these things first when you're making that location, or identifying the location, so.
So identifying some exceptions
Right.
to that.
But again, this is more restrictive than what is currently in the code.
More restrictive?
Well, less restrictive, I
Less,
guess,
okay.
if you flip the other side of the coin.
Gotcha. Madam or Mr. Attorney, whichever one is willing to answer, do you want us to do a vote for each amendment or just as a whole? How would you like us to handle?
I think your recommendation can handle it either way. If there's a consensus among the commissioners and you're in agreement, we want to give this one some more time and the other ones, just hypothetically, we're ready to send on up, then that can be your recommendation.
Just make it part of the motion?
I'd make it part of the motion. I think that'd be easier than doing a vote on all 16 items.
Oh, that's wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Chambers?
Absolutely.
So, and noted about the making it easier compared to the current code. So certainly we would want to do all we can to give you what you need to get it back to us next
Right.
month.
This is, again, I think, like Mr. Adams said, we all agree with the intent here. It's just,
Right.
it's a very complicated thing to kind of piece together when you're dealing with multiple different properties and sizes and uses and everything else. So we're happy to take this back and chew on a little bit more.
Thank you. And I think that you've heard enough of our concerns too.
Can I ask a question?
Wonderful.
It is, so we're giving the staff guidance to go back and whatever. Is there anything that prohibits one of us or a couple of us to just go meet with him like as a subcommittee and try to help them refine this a little better? Do we ever do that?
Well, we kind of did that in the work session.
I understand. I'm just, and I'm just trying to help them get us a finished product. So that's all I'm asking. It's a process question more than anything else.
Would that be helpful?
It would be helpful. I think I had to discuss with staff what's the best way to approach that.
Okay.
If we need to have smaller groups or whatnot. I know if we get everybody together, there might be some
Right, the public hearing.
advertising requirements for something like that.
And that's, so if it's helpful.
Amendment 2? Was one that we had a lot of discussion on in the work session. Did anybody have a comment or question about that one? Commissioner Lennon?
I remember Commissioner Adams brought this up, and my recollection was I think we worked through this at the work session pretty well.
Yeah, I think, again, this goes a long way towards adding flexibility as opposed to prescriptiveness, was the heart of the matter.
Commissioner Adams, are you happy with, as an architect, as a designer, are you happy with D? Facades shall be designed to be viewed from multiple directions with consistent materials and treatment that wrap around all facades. A unifying architectural theme, that's the thing that jumped out at me, for the entire development, utilizing a common vocabulary of architectural forms, elements, materials, and colors. Are you content with that language?
Yes.
Okay. To me, it sounded like it was moving in the direction of institutional, so that if there was any, okay, great. Anything else on this one? Anything, the next one I was going to pull out was Amendment 7, unless anybody has anything on, any discussion on the ones before it. Amendment 7 is the parking lot landscaping. Commissioner Lennon?
First of all, I'd like to thank staff for letting me sit in on one of those small group work sessions. And I felt like a lot of progress was made in that discussion. I think staff was very receptive, and if I don't have initials behind my name, so forgive me, but boiling it down, I think the intent is to not have these large, vast areas of asphalt, to create more shading within the parking areas, but also to make sure that the trees that are planted survive and thrive. And having said all that, I think coming back with what staff did and talking to some of the people about particular projects and engineers, like I know one of the things that was forwarded, there was a question about you could get credit for using less than, and correct me if I'm wrong, 1,000 cubic feet of soil material per tree in an island, right? If you use some pervious pavement.
It would be, I think there was an option for a suspended pavement system, which would include some impervious, yes.
Okay, so, and this is the suspended pavement system, and even though I don't have initials after my name, this is a stormwater system. In looking at it, when I started reading it today, and I asked somebody to check, and so I think there's intent on both sides to get to a better place. I just don't know that we're 100% there yet. So I'm happy to participate in another small group discussion, and I appreciated the opportunity. But the issue is, it comes down to the development world, is if we're achieving this goal yet requiring the use of more land to do so, then we're losing parking spaces and threatening the viability of the project. So it's trying to find the balance there.
So, question, so, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. So what's proposed here still limits, is that what you're saying, still limits the availability of parking spaces? Is that, do I understand it? I just want to make sure I understand it right.
Generally, I'm going to say yes, based on what I've heard from people much more knowledgeable than myself. So, yes, I would say. And I think that and again, I can just go off what people have talked about, but old code versus new code, not so many issues with the old code. Totally understand the intent behind the new code, but trying to make sure there are ways to balance it, to apply it on a site plan that don't arbitrarily limit the number of parking places.
Okay. Okay.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, I think this is another one about the prescriptive nature versus being flexible around an intent. And I mean, I realize we talked a lot about that, but there's still some very prescriptive things in what kind of came back to this. So I'm leaning towards this might be like the First Amendment. We need to kind of still chew on this and come to, really the right, appropriate sort of framework.
And if I could, I would just emphasize, I would say, having sat in on that meeting, I do think staff was all about trying to have some flexibility and work with it. I don't know that we're all the way there yet. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you. If the person making the motion would indicate Amendment 7 as removed. Sounds like that's what our, yeah. Amendment 9.
So all this is just removing BOA approval.
Correct.
All this is.
It'd still be required to mitigate those trees if they indeed had to come out.
Give me a history lesson just real quick. Why was BOA approval in there to begin with?
Originally, it was to be consistent with what New Hanover County requires, and it's
Okay.
another layer of providing justification for removal of these larger specimen trees.
Okay. So this would still be the management of this, the inspection of this would then fall to where? The TRC? Okay. That's one.
It'd be during site plan review that these trees would be evaluated, and then you work the best you can to avoid those, but in the industrial areas, it's nearly impossible based on the types of uses that you see in those areas.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions or comments on this? Questions for staff? I guess we're still at that phase. Those are all the ones I wanted to bring up for questions for staff. Did anybody else have any other questions for staff on any of these?
Madam Chair, I just had one quick one, and this may not be the right venue, but on Amendment 15, which I think was one of the new ones, which is, it looks like you were just correcting some wording. Didn't we talk at one meeting about the public meeting notices being standardized also? Not the city putting up the public hearing notices, but when community meetings are held for rezonings. I remember a discussion after one of our meetings of standardizing those somewhat. And this came up specifically from the Middle Sound Loop Road project.
Standardizing them in what way?
That if you are hosting a community meeting for a project, your sign has to look like this, so that people get used to the fact that they all look the same. And again, I know this is not the intent of this, but it just reminded me.
Right, the code currently requires the content, not the, you know, if they come back and they posted a note card and we found out about it, we would let you guys know and the council know, and they'd probably say you need to go do another meeting.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is that kind of back and forth. If they come up with something that's absurd, and the community brings it to our attention, we're going to correct that.
Right, and so my thought was just to take the mystery out of it and say
We can do that.
It's just a suggestion.
Well, I think, you know, I'm going back to my old BOA days, and I remember, you know, running into the situations where, you know, the applicant, yeah, we sent an email notice out. Well, where'd you get the email list? And turns out a lot of the properties are not owned by the resident. The resident is leasing the property. So, you know, it goes, you know, who's supposed to get notified when you do try to do that electronically? So, kind of to Commissioner Lennon's point, I mean, the Wawa thing, if you go back to the pictures earlier, had a big sign, you know, community notice. I mean, I thought that was pretty nice, and I think it would be better if there's some type of a, you know, if we can come to grips with a posted sign, just like we have, you know, the yellow and black signs. Here's the, you know, today is the 5th, yeah. April 5th, you know, public hearing, yada, yada. Something similar that the applicant is required to.
Well, they are required to post a sign, but to Mr. Lennon's point, there's no direction as to what that sign needs to look at. I think maybe having a minimum size of the letters or something like that might just be a quick fix.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with what he's saying. I mean, there's some standardization, because there have been, and it will continue to be, well, I sent an email, and we all know, you know, emails they don't replicate, they get lost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They never get read. So yes, I would be all in favor of some standardized approach that we could put into the ordinance, so that it's just not ambiguous at all.
Right, I'm sure the staff behind me is writing this down diligently, and they'll be added to our next round of amendments.
I see a lot of hands working, yeah.
They probably already got the language crafted, so we'll be ready to go to the next round.
I'm sure Catherine has it already done. So, yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Chambers? Thank you.
Thank you.
And staff is the applicant. This planning staff is the applicant, so we'll go to the public hearing. And I'm just going to open the public hearing for anyone wishing to speak for or against any of the 16 amendments that we have on item number 3. So anyone who wants to speak on agenda item number 3, welcome to the podium. Okay. The public hearing is closed. We kind of had some deliberations there with the staff questions, but does anybody have any other comments? All righty. What's the will of the commission?
I'll make a motion, Madam Chair. Moved approval of agenda item number 3 the approval of various amendments and cleanup items to the Land Development Code. Request is reasonable and consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the proposed amendments will correct minor errors, provide clarifications, and correct issues discovered during implementation of the Land Development Code, and help reinforce the overall goals of the comprehensive plan. Further move that we exclude amendments number 1 and number 7 as presented in the staff report for future consideration.
Commissioner Lennon has moved to approve agenda item number 3 with the exception of amendment 1 and 7. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes 6-0. Moving on to agenda item number 4, the chairperson has requested recusal. I've requested recusal from agenda item number 4. Would someone like to make a motion to recuse me from agenda item number 4?
I move you be allowed to recuse yourself from the next agenda item.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, take it away. You can't touch my gavel, though.
I can't, it's your gavel. Okay, next agenda item is it's a Land Development Code amendment. The application to amend Article 5, Section 18-393, Regulation of Outdoor Advertising Signs to change provisions related to setback of billboards from residentially zoned property and illumination, and Catherine Thurston will discuss the item with the commission.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. The item before you is an applicant-initiated amendment to the Land Development Code that would allow billboards to be located closer to residential areas and would require light-blocking louvers for digital billboards near residential properties. Currently, billboards are a legal non-conforming use in the city limits, and they have been since the 1980s, which is about the same time frame in which the city adopted its original urban design policy, emphasizing the importance of signage regulations on the aesthetics of the city's commercial corridors, particularly the entryways into the city, or the gateways. From the 1980s until 2008, billboards could not be substantially altered or reconstructed if destroyed. An amendment approved in 2008 allowed the modernization of billboards, namely the replacement of multi-pole signs with monopoles, and limited digitization of such billboards subject to registration requirements and restrictions on the placement, as well as several other items. Relocated signs, and I may have the wrong presentation up for mine, but I'll keep moving through. I guess we'll find out. Relocated signs are allowed only in the community business, the regional business, the commercial services, light industrial, and industrial districts along the portions of Market Street, Oleander Drive, College Road, Carolina Beach Road, and Shipyard Boulevard that are shown on the map in the corner. The green areas along North College Road and the Dawson-Worcester corridor are considered gateways, and all of a sign company's signs must be removed from those locations prior to digitizing any relocated signs. And this is the incorrect presentation. It should be saved in the folder on the S drive. Some of the maps in the updated presentation will be helpful in understanding how the billboard ordinance has changed throughout the years. This looks better. This identifies the receiving zones for relocated and reconstructed billboards. Those are shown in orange in this map, and Those are located along Market Street, South College Road, Oleander Drive, Carolina Beach Road, and Shipyard Boulevard. And then circled in red, you'll see the roadways North 3rd Street, North College Road, and Dawson and Wooster identified as the gateways for the city. So the 2020 amendment reclassified 2 existing signs in the city to gateway signs and allowed the owner of those signs to digitize all of their signs in Wilmington, as well as add an additional sign face in exchange for the removal of the 2 gateway signs, the 2 new gateway signs, which are shown on purple in the map in front of you. Staff has been working for the past couple of years with that applicant to determine compliance of some of the locations that have been proposed for placement of those signs, but we have been unsuccessful in helping them identify an area that would work. The proposed amendment would expand the allowable area in which those signs could be located by changing the way the separation is measured. The applicant proposes to allow sign placement closer than 200 feet from residential when separated by a right-of-way, and would require that such relocated signs be fitted with light blocking louvers to shield lighting towards residentially zoned or used property. And this slide's to help illustrate the potential impact of this change on residential areas. The parcel located to the north is zoned community business and is within a designated receiving zone, which would allow for relocated billboards. The southern portion of Holly Tree is zoned residential, and let's see, the label for Holly Tree didn't show up on this particular map, but that would preclude the placement of a billboard on that lot under current code. So Holly Tree is, looking at the map prior to this, you can see the street names. It's the one running straight through the site. With the proposed amendment, the separation requirement would not apply because the property is separated by a right-of-way. And so even though the impact is the same or potentially greater, since the asphalt does nothing to shield this use, the billboard could be sited about 100 feet from that residence. The Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan identifies gateways and commercial corridors as important focus areas because of their aesthetic value and how they frame the city's image from an economic development standpoint. The plan calls for improvements in development codes and infrastructure investments in these areas, specifically calling for signage to be placed and designed to enhance the overall built environment, reinforce the identity of a district, and balance aesthetic, economic, and safety needs. Changing how separation requirements are measured not only increases the allowable parcels within designated receiving zones on which billboards could relocate, but it also exacerbates their impact on residential areas and creates inconsistencies within the code by measuring separation differently when impacting residential property versus commercial. Staff recommends denial of the applicant's proposal based on these inconsistencies with the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan and the impact the amendment would have on residential neighborhoods located proximate to commercial corridors in receiving zones for outdoor advertising signs. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have of staff, and the applicant and the applicant's attorney are also present with a presentation.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions? Ms. Thurston? Commissioner Adams?
The separations always talk about linear distance, and is that always parallel to the right-of-way?
They're not. It's typically as the crow flies.
Okay, so it's really radial and not linear.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else? Ms. Thurston, thank you. This time, is the applicant present?
Thank you.
I have a presentation as well. I'm probably going to skip a lot of it because Ms. Thurston went over a lot and I only have 5 minutes. My name is Amy Schaefer. I'm here on behalf of Gray Vic, the applicant for Gray Outdoor. We have nothing but agreement with Ms. Thurston's history of what's happening here. So back in 2000, Mr. Vick did come to the Planning Commission and City Council for a text amendment. These are the 2 remaining billboards that he has in the gateway, the one by Costco and the one by the 1898. He's been trying to move them desperately for 2 years, as Ms. Thurston said, trying to find a location. Zoning authority is health, safety, and welfare. I think Ms. Thurston on the staff report clearly said the health, safety, and welfare is the separation from residential areas to ensure the roadways are not overcrowded and to protect less intense land uses from uses that are out of scale. We wholly agree with that as well. So the current request, and I'm actually going to get back to this. I'm going to tell you what started our journey here. There is a parcel of land, it's the Network Realty parcel of land that Mr. Vick found, and he thought this is going to be perfect for one of my gateway relocations. So he submitted a permit, and it was denied. And the reason was that this tiny parcel of the church property, as you can see up in the corner, is zoned residential, and then the park, Longleaf Park, is zoned residential. So it was too close to residential within 200 feet. You know, Mr. Vick thought it was on the other side of Parkway Drive, so it's separated by a right-of-way. It's 200 feet down College, you know, linear distance to the park, so we're good. But the permit was denied. Another property that he looked at is on Oleander, and he went to get a permit for there and looked at it. And in the back of that parcel, there is a small part that is zoned residential still. So even if he were to talk to the neighboring property owners, and he has been, there's a greenhouse operating on those. He's working to get those properties rezoned to be appropriate zoning for the greenhouses. There's still an R15 sliver of property in the back of that commercial, can't be built for residential, can't put anything on it, but it would be within 200 feet of the sign. So we were trying to come up with some language that would exclude these kinds of parcels that can't be built on for residential. So we're willing to take out the language that said if it's separated on the other side of a road. We understand Ms. Thurston's concern with that, and there are a lot of issues. But really, if the property cannot be built for residential, if it doesn't meet minimum building requirements, if it's otherwise restricted for residential use, you're not completing any of those required zoning authority and the purpose of the code. So that's what we're here to ask for. In addition, if the radial measurement is a concern, there are light blocking technologies that you can use, such as these louvers, that if you're not looking directly at the sign, you don't see the light. And we do have a quick video. And just wondering, were there others? There's a sign right here on South College Road that's already there, already digitized. And as you can see, these parcels are zoned RB, but they're actually split zone too. I didn't do a measurement. I don't know if it's too close. That's not why we're here. It's just there are a lot of these split zone properties around the city. So we believe that our change isn't really asking to change anything. It's still protecting residential. It's still requiring the separation requirements. You're not really adding any more billboards than are already there because we can't. We're just trying to move two out of the gateways. And I do have a quick video that if it'll play. Did you enable the content? There's like a button that you have to press saying enable content. Anyway, it's a video that shows how the light blocking louvers kind of work for the digital billboards. So let me just check really close. I want to make sure that I didn't miss any really important points. I think that's everything, unless you guys have any questions. Oh, I did want to point out one thing. In the benchmarking in the staff report, there's actually measurements that are radial. So some of those benchmarking cities measure radially from the sign, and you know, ours does say linear, and if the intent is to protect the congestion and the amount of signs on a roadway, then the 200 feet should probably be measured down the roadway. But that's what we're here to ask for today, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Lennon?
conceptually, at least as it pertains to these two sites, I get it. My fear is that you're bringing a gun to a knife fight. And this is a blanket fix that I don't know that I'm comfortable with a blanket fix.
Sure.
But I don't know what other, and this may be, Ms. Thurston may need to, I don't know what other remedies there may or may not be, but it does make sense to me if it's a church and a park, which is deed restricted to be a park, right?
Yes,
Okay, so nobody's gonna ever build on it,
correct.
but it happens to be zone residential, I get it. I just don't know that I feel comfortable changing the whole.
Sure. And we did go to Board of Adjustment first. That's public record. I don't think there's any. And they didn't find a hardship because for Board of Adjustment, you have to show a hardship. And they said, well, you don't have to move the signs. So it's not a hardship. There's no hardship created. It's just a policy of the city to move the signs. And so that wasn't a consideration for that. We're honestly out of options for these kinds of situations other than a text amendment, unless, if the way the code is written right now, the measurement is 200 feet down the linear foot, this site and the Oleander site would be compliant because we're not within 200 linear feet down the corridor, down the road of any residential on either of those. But that wasn't the zoning interpretation that was made. It was the radial measurement.
Any other questions? Okay, you're speaking for the applicant, correct, Amy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so at this point, I guess I would open up the public hearing. Are there any people here, anyone here that would like to speak in favor of this amendment? Anyone here like to speak against it? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and look to the commissioners for discussion.
I share some of Mr. Lennon's concerns. I think that this is a situation where generalization change is intended to address specific sites or problems, and that's hard for me to kind of get on board with. I also think about just because a site doesn't have residential as a use that's on it, even though it's zoned residential, there's nothing to say that use couldn't change. And then you would run into situations where potentially you do have residential on a parcel that maybe once didn't. So the gun to the knife fight is a good sort of comparison here for me too.
Anyone else?
Ms. Thurston, is she correct? Are they out of options at this point?
Without knowing what properties are on the market, we can only identify areas in which the signs would be allowed and not necessarily determine whether they're available or whether the property owner would be amenable to locating a billboard on that property. So I'd have to defer to the applicant on the exhaustion of other opportunities.
Thank you.
There are always options. I hate to say anything's available for a price, but is it a good location? Is it a viable location? Not to mention they have to be separated from other signs by 1,000 feet. They have to be separated from historic districts. I would like to point out, though, that Mr. Adams said that if it could be residential in the future, absolutely. We are saying if it doesn't meet minimum building requirements for residential, that's the request. This little sliver back there, you can't develop that residential. You would have to come in for a whole rezoning for the whole parcel or combine it with the neighboring properties. The same for the church parcels. So we're only really at this point asking for properties that cannot be developed residential the way that they are. And again, there might be other places, but two that he's looked at and a third that already has a sign on it show the split zone nature of some of the properties around town, which kind of creates, you know, a hardship, not to the Board of Adjustment, but, you know, for Mr. Vick and his business, so. Happy to offer any other suggestions, any other thoughts, ideas. Go back to the drawing board and work some more if you guys have some ideas. But really wanted to bring this to the attention because, again, it has been 2 years that he's been looking for sites, so.
Any other questions of staff or the applicant? Any other comments in general? Then I would be looking for an amendment or a proposed amendment.
I'll make it a motion on agenda item 4, request changes to the separation and lighting requirements for billboard. For rejection, this request is not reasonable and is not consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission considers its rejection to be reasonable and in the public interest because changing the way separation between billboards and residential areas is measured will result in the potential for billboards to locate significantly closer to residential uses and will expand the number of viable locations for relocated billboards into the city's commercial corridors.
Motion has been made. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Commissioner Goins. Motion made by Commissioner Adams. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes. Ms. Lyles, you may come back and reclaim your gavel.
All right, we're on the home stretch here. Any items from the commission?
I do have one. You and I kind of talked about this offline, but we probably ought to do a little future planning because as we get into the summer months, who's going to be here, who's not going to be here, make sure that obviously between you and I we're covered, but make sure we have quorums at any given time. So we ought to be thinking about that, and maybe it's just an offhand discussion, but it's just just something I would want us to think about collectively.
Put in your vacation requests.
Yeah, effectively, that's really what it is, yeah. So that's my
Thank you.
thing. Yeah.
All right, anything, what do we have from the staff?
Could you speak into the mic, please?
Different microphone, I apologize. I am actually very happy to announce that Brian this morning accepted the position of Assistant Director. So, yes, and he gave me permission to announce that to everyone this evening. So he officially starts that position on Monday. And so you'll be seeing some changing roles moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amy's helping me out here. Since Brian had to leave early. So at last night's council meeting, the rezonings for that land swap associated with the switchyard apartments was approved by the council.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other business before us, would love to have a motion for adjournment.
Make a motion to adjourn.
So do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to that one? Have a good night, everyone.
Yep.